Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today we'll dive into the darkest and most mysterious magic in the world of Harry Potter, Horcruxes. In his quest for immortality, Voldemort tore his soul apart and hid the fragments in various objects. Horcruxes became the key to his destruction. As long as even one existed, the Dark Lord could not be truly defeated. Yet despite their crucial role in the story, Horcruxes remain shrouded in mystery. In this episode, we'll uncover strange and lesser-known facts that reveal the shadowy corners of the wizarding world. Enjoy the video. Number 1, J.K. Rowling knows how to make them, but won't say. In both the books and the movies, the process of creating a Horcrux is left vague. We're only told the basics. A soul must be split through murder, and then a spell binds that fragment to an object. That's it. But how exactly? What spell? What are the conditions? Nowhere is this explained. J.K. Rowling admitted she knows all the details, but deliberately refuses to reveal them. As she put it, some knowledge should stay within the book. Perhaps so no one gets any bright ideas in real life. Number 2, the temporary Horcrux. One of the most overlooked Horcruxes was actually temporary, Professor Quirrell. He wasn't a Horcrux in the traditional sense, but his body carried Voldemort's soul. Essentially, he was a living vessel, a host. Unlike the objects holding soul shards, Quirrell carried the Dark Lord's main fragment. The question is, how many more temporary Horcruxes did Voldemort use during his years of wandering? We'll never truly know. Number 3. Voldemort wasn't the first to create a Horcrux. The very first Horcrux is believed to have been made by Herpo the Foul, a dark wizard from ancient Greece. He invented the ritual. He also bred the first basilisk and, according to legends, was one of the earliest parselmouths. Some whisper he might have been an ancestor of Salazar Slytherin, and thus of Voldemort himself. The most disturbing part? We don't know if Herpo's Horcrux was ever destroyed. It might still be out there, lurking. Number 4. Harry should have been able to control the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets. Tom Riddle claims only he can command the basilisk. He insists that even though Harry is a parselmouth, he won't be able to do the same. But here's the catch. Harry is a Horcrux. He contains a piece of Voldemort's soul. The basilisk should have sensed this. In theory, Harry should have had some control over the creature. Maybe when Rowling wrote that scene, she hadn't yet decided Harry would become a Horcrux. Or maybe she simply forgot. Number 5. Horcruxes behave differently in books and films. According to the books, Voldemort doesn't feel the destruction of his Horcruxes. He needs to physically check on them to know they're gone. But in the films, it's the complete opposite. Each Horcrux destroyed brings him visible pain. And not just him. Harry suffers too. The movies suggest Horcruxes are spiritually linked, and their destruction sends ripples through the soul of their creator. Number 6. There's a fairy tale about them. In the Tales of Beedle the Bard, there's a story that eerily resembles the making of a Horcrux, the Warlock's hairy heart. It's a chilling tale of a wizard who removes his own heart and locks it away so he won't feel emotions. When he tries to take it back, darkness consumes him. Tearing out one's heart is, of course, impossible magic. But the idea, keeping something alive outside the body, is eerily similar to a Horcrux. Perhaps the story is a metaphor, a warning, or a subtle nod to real dark rituals. Number 7. Destroying Horcruxes requires unique conditions. Horcruxes don't die easily. They were made not to. Each one needed something extraordinary to be destroyed. When Harry plunged the basilisk fang into Tom Riddle's diary, the pages bled ink like it was blood. The diary screamed. A jet of ink streamed from the diary's pages, Rowling wrote. It wasn't just a book. It was a living piece of soul. And it took the venom of a creature bred to kill with just a glance to destroy it. The ring of Marvolo Gaunt was no less cursed. Dumbledore used the sword of Gryffindor to destroy it, a blade that had absorbed basilisk venom when Harry killed the serpent in the Chamber of Secrets. The same sword was later used to destroy the locket of Salazar Slytherin. Hermione destroyed Hufflepuff's cup with another basilisk fang taken from the chamber's remains. The items were ancient, enchanted, and deadly, and so were the tools needed to end them. Even Harry's own accidental Horcrux required something rare, Voldemort himself. When the Dark Lord hit Harry with the killing curse in the Forbidden Forest, he unknowingly destroyed the part of his own soul that clung to the boy. There was no spellbook, no ritual, just death, given by the one who created the bond. It proved that Horcruxes couldn't be undone with a simple wand wave. They demanded sacrifice, and they fought to the end. Number 8, creating Horcruxes changes appearance and personality. Tom Riddle was once beautiful, charismatic, a boy with dark eyes and sharp features, admired by teachers, trusted by classmates. But with every Horcrux he created, something changed. His skin paled to the color of parchment. His nose flattened. His pupils slit like a serpent's. By the time he returned as Lord Voldemort, he was unrecognizable, not just in form as Dub, but in soul. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore says quietly, he shed his handsome features. He was becoming less human. That wasn't metaphor. The mutilation of the soul left marks. Each Horcrux was a wound, not only on what was inside, but on what was outside too. The magic twisted him, not through glamour or curse, but through sheer internal decay. His mind followed the same path. Paranoia took root. He trusted no one. He murdered even the loyal. When Bellatrix Lestrange pleaded for his favor, he gave her only commands. When Severus Snape begged to help him protect Draco, Voldemort showed nothing, not concern, not warmth, only cold calculation. Every connection became a threat, every life a tool or an enemy. By the end, he was no longer a man, just a shell fueled by fear, hatred, and obsession. The price of immortality was everything that made him human. The more he split his soul, the less he had left to feel. No love, no remorse. Just red eyes in the dark, searching for enemies where once there might have been friends. Number 9. Voldemort might have accidentally created more Horcruxes. Voldemort killed without hesitation. Wizards, muggles, even his own followers. He tore lives apart with no remorse, and every time he did, his soul, already fractured, grew weaker. Fan theories suggest that some of these murders may have created accidental Horcruxes, soul fragments breaking loose without his knowledge. Because if murder is the act that splits the soul, what if the magic reacts even without the ritual? He never followed the rules. He experimented. He pushed limits. During the First Wizarding War, bodies fell by the dozens. Voldemort murdered Bertha Jorkins, Amelia Bones, Caractacus Burke. None of those deaths were meant for Horcrux creation. But what if a fragment still broke away? In Half-Blood Prince, Slughorn says, killing rips the soul apart. The wizard intent upon creating a Horcrux would use the damage, but the damage happens either way. And if that fragment had nowhere to go? What if it latched onto something? A wand, a coin, a piece of stone. A cursed object waiting in the shadows, forgotten, unmarked, not one of the 7 Voldemort crafted with purpose, but still dangerous, still humming with pain. Perhaps that's why the magical world still fears cursed artifacts. Not all of them were born from intent. Some may have been born from chaos. Even Dumbledore admitted the magic was unstable. Horcruxes are not science. They're sorcery, deep, unnatural magic. And Voldemort, in his arrogance, may have scattered more of himself than he ever meant to. Not all monsters leave footprints. Some leave fragments. Number 10. Horcruxes can sense and influence each other. When Harry wore the locket, something inside him twisted. He felt it throb, almost like a second heartbeat. Angry thoughts came faster. Doubts grew louder. Ron snapped at Hermione. Hermione grew cold. They all fought more. But for Harry, the weight was different. He was a Horcrux himself. The locket didn't just disturb him, and it recognized him. One broken soul reaching for another. In the Deathly Hallows, Rowling describes the medallion as cold against the skin, whispering dark things. When Harry carried it, he saw visions. His scar burned more fiercely. "It was like carrying hate," he said once. The others noticed it too. Hermione urged them to take turns wearing it, just to survive the moods. But no matter who wore it, The atmosphere around them soured. Hope faded. Trust thinned. Some fans believed the Horcruxes were aware of each other, connected, even across distances. When Harry and the locket were near, the emotional storm grew worse. That wasn't coincidence, it was contact. One piece of Voldemort's soul brushing against another, a silent pull, a dark resonance, like magnets made of malice. Their proximity didn't just cause discomfort, it caused decay. These weren't just objects, they were fragments of something alive, violent, wounded, and full of will. When brought close, they echoed off each other, amplified the darkness. Perhaps that's why Dumbledore warned against handling them lightly. They weren't meant to be together. Just like Voldemort himself, their reunion brought destruction. Number 11, Dumbledore suspected Horcruxes long before they were confirmed. Albus Dumbledore was never truly surprised by the truth. When he finally saw the memory where Horace Slughorn spoke of Horcruxes to a young Tom Riddle, he didn't react with shock. He reacted with confirmation. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry, "I have been sure for some time that Tom Riddle made a Horcrux. What I did not know and could not guess was that he had made more than one." That sentence says everything. He had suspected long before the memories surfaced. Dumbledore had watched Riddle too closely, too long, to believe his powers were natural. He visited the orphanage. He saw the boy's cruelty. He later tracked his steps, Borgin and Burke's, Hepzibah Smith, the ring, the diary. Every step darker than the last. Dumbledore was piecing it together for years. He knew that Voldemort feared death above all else. And when a man like that disappears for a decade and returns unchanged, something unnatural is at work. That's why Dumbledore studied Riddle's past with such obsession. He didn't just want to understand Tom, he wanted to find his weaknesses. He read records, questioned old teachers, recovered cursed objects. Each clue pointed towards something more horrible than mere dark magic. And when the diary of Riddle nearly killed Ginny Weasley in the Chamber of Secrets, it confirmed what he feared. Voldemort wasn't just powerful, he was split. By the time Harry joined the hunt for Horcruxes, Dumbledore had already found the ring and suspected the locket. He didn't act out of curiosity. He acted out of preparation. He had been planning this fight for years, a slow, quiet war against something no one else had even seen. While the rest of the wizarding world looked for the Dark Lord's army, Dumbledore was already fighting his soul. Number 12. Harry lost Parseltongue. After the Horcrux was destroyed, Harry Potter could speak to snakes. From the moment he made a Burmese python wink at him in the Philosopher's Stone, readers knew something strange lived inside him. The ability, Parseltongue, was rare, feared, and usually tied to dark magic. Only a handful of wizards in history could speak it. Salazar Slytherin, Herpo the Foul, and of course, Lord Voldemort. For years, Harry believed it was just part of who he was, a strange gift, a quirk of fate. But the truth was darker. In the Deathly Hallows, during the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort unknowingly destroyed the fragment of his soul living inside Harry. The Horcrux within him, the unwanted hitchhiker, was burned away by the killing curse. After that moment, Harry lost his connection to the Dark Lord, and with it his ability to speak. Parseltongue vanished forever. J.K. Rowling confirmed this in an interview. The language had never been Harry's. It was Voldemort's voice living inside him, whispering in a tongue no one else could hear. The snake language wasn't a talent, it was a scar, a magical echo of another man's soul. And when that soul was gone, so was the voice. As Rowling wrote in The Deathly Hallows, the last Horcrux was gone. Voldemort had unwittingly killed the piece of his own soul lodged inside Harry. This small detail is easy to miss, but it marks a turning point. Harry is no longer the boy shaped by Voldemort's shadow. He is whole, free, no longer tied to a language that made others fear him, no longer cursed to carry a piece of his enemy within. The Parseltongue's gift died with the Horcrux, and in losing it, Harry became fully himself for the first time. Number 13, Umbridge, wore a Horcrux. and it changed her. Dolores Umbridge wore Slytherin's locket for an unknown amount of time during the events of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. She didn't know it was one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, but the effects were clear. Already cruel and power-hungry, Umbridge became almost monstrous while wearing it. Her obsession with control, her hatred toward Muggleborns, and her sadistic delight in punishments only grew worse. In the Ministry, she presided over trials that resembled pure-blood witch hunts. "You are not a witch," she told Mary Cattermole coldly, as Dementors circled the courtroom. The chill wasn't just magical, it came from Umbridge herself. The locket had been stolen from the Black family home by Mundungus Fletcher and somehow ended up in Umbridge's hands. She wore it openly, as a sign of status and authority. But it was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a fragment of Voldemort's soul, pulsing with darkness. Fans believe it fed off her inner cruelty, magnifying it. The same Horcrux had made Ron Weasley paranoid and bitter after just days. Umbridge wore it for weeks. What did that do to her already twisted mind? Rowling never confirms that the locket changed her. But the timing is suspicious. Before she had the locket, Umbridge was still awful, but she was careful, bureaucratic. Afterward, she became truly terrifying. Her rules at Hogwarts were strict, but under the locket's influence, her ministry work became outright persecution. She smiled as people were dragged away. She signed papers that ruined lives. "Blood traitors and mudbloods," she whispered, clutching the locket close, believing it made her powerful. In truth, it was draining what little soul she had left. This is one of the rare cases where a Horcrux was worn by someone who had no idea what it truly was. She wasn't possessed like Ginny Weasley had been in the Chamber of Secrets, but the influence was there, slower, subtler. The locket didn't need to control Umbridge, it only needed to whisper, and she, already dark at heart, listened. Number 14. Some Horcruxes fought back when destroyed. It sat in the heart of the forest like a curse waiting to be undone. A locket, beautiful but heavy with a darkness that pulsed from within. The moment they took it from Umbridge at the Ministry, they knew it was no ordinary object. But it wasn't until Ron Weasley raised the sword of Gryffindor to destroy it that its true nature unveiled itself. Vicious, sentient, and cruelly aware. Horcruxes, many assumed, were just containers for torn soul fragments, passive tokens of dark ambition. That assumption, it turned out, was dangerously naive. The locket had always exuded unease. Even when worn around the neck, it seemed to breathe, to watch. It brought tension between friends, exacerbated anger, deepened fears. But until it was under threat, until Ron stood before it with shaking hands, blade poised, no one could have imagined that it would fight back. Not physically, but mentally, psychologically. The locket wasn't just an anchor for Voldemort's soul. It was an echo of him, a sliver of hate wrapped in silver and serpentine design, and it was ready to strike. The forest was cold that night. Ron had just returned, guided by the light of the Deluminator and a yearning that went deeper than he could explain. He found Harry struggling to retrieve the sword from the bottom of a frozen pool, nearly drowning in the attempt. After pulling him to safety, they stood together in silence, shivering, until Harry placed the locket on a nearby rock and stepped aside. It was Ron's task. The sword was meant for him. When he raised the blade, the locket trembled. It did not break, not at once. It cracked open, not like glass, but like a mind unraveling. And then it showed him what it held: fear, doubt, and poison laced with truth. Ron was flooded with visions, overwhelming and cruel, crafted with surgical precision. A giant eye, Voldemort's eye, opened in the locket and stared into him, boring into every secret wound he carried. Then came the voices. Hermione's voice, twisted into mockery, Harry's voice, calm and dismissive. They laughed at Ron, belittled him, taunted him. Least loved always, they said. Second best friend, sidekick, nothing more. It was Voldemort's cruelty in its purest, most refined form. Not with spells, not with torture, but with manipulation. The locket knew where to dig. It knew Ron's insecurities better than Ron himself did. It wasn't merely a hallucination, it was strategic psychological warfare. The Horcrux didn't just want to survive, it fought to survive. It didn't scream or shriek, it whispered with deadly accuracy. It fed on Ron's jealousy of Harry and his fear of being overlooked. The Horcrux magnified every self-doubt he had ever felt, and it did so with the cold patience of a predator. What's remarkable is not only that the locket resisted its destruction, but that it did so intelligently. It was aware. Not sentient in the human sense, but alive in the way a storm is alive, unthinking but deadly and capable of targeting weakness. When J.K. Rowling wrote that the Horcrux opened and showed a great gleaming eye, she wasn't merely describing a spell. She was describing the horror of facing one's own reflection, a distorted mirror laced with hatred. We often think of Horcruxes as passive items, magical vessels of hidden fragments, but this moment proves they are more than that. Each Horcrux carries not only a piece of Voldemort's soul, but a personality, a warped, volatile expression of who he was when that piece was torn away. This is important. Each time Voldemort split his soul, he did so through an act of murder, and that act infused the fragment with the emotion of the moment: rage, fear, triumph, or cruelty. In the case of the locket created after the murder of a Muggle tramp in the cave where Voldemort placed the potion trap, the emotion was bitter conquest. The result was a Horcrux that radiated control, jealousy, and manipulative power. It clung to whoever wore it, whispering lies, stretching truth until it snapped. It broke the trio's unity and almost broke Ron entirely. When Ron left, it was not merely because of the hardships of the journey, but because of the locket's slow, poisonous influence. When Ron finally struck it with the sword, he had to overcome not just his doubts, but a psychic assault that was as violent as any duel. The locket revealed a vision of Harry and Hermione together, laughing, kissing, not as friends, but as lovers. And Ron, in the vision, stood outside of it all, alone and invisible. The Horcrux was not trying to kill him physically. It wanted to destroy his identity. It wanted him to give up, because that would mean its survival. And this is what makes Horcruxes uniquely terrifying. They don't have bodies, but they have agency. They don't cast spells, but they know your fears. They are like magical parasites, not just clinging to life, but defending it with everything they have. And unlike Voldemort, they have nothing left to lose. A Horcrux cannot be redeemed. It cannot grow. It is frozen in the moment it was created, a shard of raw emotion and dark magic. There's something primal about how the locket fought. It's almost like a cornered animal, but smarter, more venomous, more surgical. And if we look back at other Horcruxes, we begin to see a pattern. The diary, for instance, didn't just whisper to Ginny Weasley, it possessed her. It made her act. It didn't resist destruction in the same theatrical way, but it manipulated events to defend itself for an entire school year. Then there's the cup of Helga Hufflepuff. When Hermione, Ron, and Harry broke into Bellatrix's vault to retrieve it, they triggered another defense, the Gemino curse, which caused objects to multiply and burn to the touch. The cup didn't cry out, it didn't speak, but its defense was environmental, a trap that would bury them alive in cursed gold. Again, it shows that each Horcrux had its own means of resisting death, and they were rarely passive. Number 15, Horcruxes are protected against normal magic. In the shadowed corners of the magical world, where even the boldest wizards hesitate to tread, there lies a truth about Horcruxes that many overlook. These objects, forged through an act of dark violence and imbued with a fragment of soul, are not just containers, they are fortresses. The destruction of a Horcrux is not merely a task of locating and striking, it is a battle against ancient and layered protections, designed to defy even the most potent spells in a wizard's arsenal. Hermione Granger, known for her exceptional intellect and mastery of magic, learned this lesson firsthand when she attempted to destroy Salazar Slytherin's locket. The medallion, once hanging with deceptive innocence around the necks of the unsuspecting, was far more than a piece of jewelry. After Harry, Ron, and Hermione recovered it from the depths of the Ministry of Magic, Hermione, ever methodical, tried to eliminate it using an array of spells, reducto, incendio, even more obscure enchantments from the darker sections of her spellbooks, but the locket remained intact, unblemished, its sinister aura untouched by her efforts. Magic, even pure and directed with intention, faltered before the unnatural resistance of the Horcrux. It was not a failure of skill. It was the proof of something darker embedded in the artifact, an immunity, a defense, unlike any other. This resistance was not incidental. It stemmed from the very act of its creation. When a soul is split through murder and forced into an object, the object is not just a container, it becomes cursed. The process, according to Horace Slughorn's hesitant recollection, is deliberately vague and shrouded in secrecy, but its outcome is clear. The object becomes a stronghold of magic. Not all magic, however, only magic pure and destructive enough to counteract the corrupted soul inside can undo it. What destroyed the locket in the end was not a spell at all, but the enchanted steel of Godric Gryffindor's sword. Infused with basilisk venom after Harry used it in the Chamber of Secrets, the sword had absorbed one of the rare substances powerful enough to destroy a Horcrux. When Ron plunged the blade into the locket, it shrieked, not just in sound but in essence, as the soul fragment inside was torn apart. The locket fell open, a terrible scream issued from its depths, and the thing inside was gone. Magic had not worked, but venom had. This fact alone reframes the understanding of Horcruxes. They are not merely cursed objects, but protected relics. Their defense mechanisms are so complete that even powerful wizards like Dumbledore needed rare substances or dangerous methods to break them. It was not enough to know where they were. One had to know how they were made and how they could die. The destruction of Tom Riddle's diary by a basilisk fang was the first clue. Later, Dumbledore used the same logic to destroy Marvolo Gaunt's ring, using the sword of Gryffindor again. The consistency is telling. Basilisk venom is not merely toxic, it is one of the very few substances that destroys the soul. The idea of magical protection is even more visible in the case of Helga Hufflepuff's cup. Hidden in the vaults of Bellatrix Lestrange, the cup was not only buried beneath mounds of duplicating burning treasure, but also protected by enchantments that made access nearly impossible. Touching one object caused it to multiply rapidly, overwhelming intruders in a tide of hot metal. This wasn't just a security mechanism of the vault, it was protection meant to ensure no one would ever touch the real cup, let alone think to destroy it. And yet, even if someone managed to retrieve the cup, the problem remained. How do you destroy it? The trio, now wiser and desperate, carried basilisk fangs retrieved from the Chamber of Secrets for precisely this purpose. Hermione drove one into the cup, and again the response was immediate and visceral. A scream, a crack, a burst of magic. It was not the spell, it was the venom that triumphed. A scream issued from the cup, echoed around the vault, and then silence. Protection, so thorough and ancient, could only be undone by deeper, darker forces. The diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw provides another lens through which this layered defense can be examined. Hidden in the room of requirement, the diadem had an aura of concealment so strong that even generations of students never stumbled upon it. When finally unearthed by Harry and his friends, its destruction followed the now understood method. Another basilisk fang, another cry of soul-deep agony. The same rule applied. No spell could have done it, but perhaps the most telling instance of protection comes from the locket. When worn, the locket did not merely sit passively. It whispered, it sowed division, it conjured illusions and fear. It attacked not with curses, but with despair. Ron, at one point, was nearly overcome by it. It showed him visions of Harry and Hermione, of failure, of being unloved. This was not simple magic, it was psychological warfare. The soul fragment inside was aware, cunning, and vicious. The protection of the Horcrux extended beyond physical damage. It invaded the mind. Voldemort, in his arrogance, believed no one could find or destroy his Horcruxes, and in many ways he was nearly right. Each one had a unique set of defenses. The ring was cursed, the locket resisted magic, the cup was protected by enchantments, the diadem by obscurity and illusion. Even Nagini, the living Horcrux, was kept close, protected by proximity. To reach her was to go through Voldemort himself. Protection again was the pattern. One cannot forget the final confrontation in the Forbidden Forest. There, Harry realized he himself was the unintentional Horcrux, and in a cruel irony, Voldemort's own killing curse, meant to end Harry, became the very thing that destroyed the soul fragment within him. The killing curse is perhaps the only spell powerful enough to destroy a Horcrux because it targets the soul directly. It leaves no wound, but it eradicates the essence of life, and thus the soul fragment inside Harry was erased, not by intention, but by fate. Number 16, the Horcrux inside Harry granted him unique powers. There is a fact buried deep within the story of Harry Potter, subtle yet transformative, often overshadowed by the grandeur of battles and the weight of prophecy. Harry was not merely marked by Lord Voldemort, he was infused. A fragment of the Dark Lord's soul lived within him, unintentionally making the boy a Horcrux. This secret reshaped his journey in ways many overlook, not only marking him as a target, but gifting him abilities that blurred the boundary between self and enemy. Long before he knew the truth, Harry had already exhibited signs of an unnatural connection. His very first encounter with magic, the incident with the glass at the zoo in Philosopher's Stone, hinted at something more. It was not just rebellion against Dudley's cruelty. It was the beginning of something far older and darker. When Harry spoke to the boa constrictor, telling it, "Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo," the glass vanished. But the real anomaly was the ease with which he communicated, not just to a snake, but with a snake. Parcel tongue was a gift inherited only by Salazar, Slytherin's bloodline. Harry should never have known it. He was not a descendant. And yet, the snake understood. Dumbledore would later admit, "You have a power that Voldemort has never had. You can love." But alongside that power, something sinister lurked. The ability to speak Parseltongue was not learned. It was absorbed, copied, embedded in his being. It came from the piece of soul embedded in Harry's scar, a fragment of Tom Riddle echoing through the years. The magic of a Horcrux, designed to anchor the soul to the earth, had instead lashed itself to a living boy. In Chamber of Secrets, the connection deepened. When Harry entered the chamber and faced Tom Riddle's memory, the air shimmered with prophecy. "You're like me," Riddle had said, his voice cool and calculating. "You're a Parselmouth." But the similarities were more than verbal quirks. Harry's mind had begun to operate differently. He sensed things others could not. He felt Voldemort, a sensation that would become more defined in the years to come. By the time of Goblet of Fire, the connection was nearly a thread of fire. During the third task of the Triwizard Tournament, just before encountering the Death Eaters and Voldemort's rebirth, Harry began experiencing pain in his scar that was no longer intermittent or subtle. It came in waves. His scar hurt more than it had in years. It was a burning, stabbing pain. This was not mere reaction, it was communication. Unconscious, involuntary, a flickering link between two minds. The dreams began soon after. Vivid, terrifying, and uninvited. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry witnessed things he had no way of knowing. He saw Nagini attacking Arthur Weasley in real time. The scene was described in brutal detail. He was looking through the snake's eyes, through the coils of its body. It wasn't a dream, it was possession. Through the fragment of soul inside him, Harry had become a conduit, not just an observer. The horror wasn't that he saw it, but that he was the snake. The Horcrux inside him blurred identity. These visions were not always malevolent. Sometimes they brought Harry insight. He felt emotions that were not his own, frustration, rage, triumph, and learned to interpret them. He once recognized Voldemort's excitement before the Ministry incident. "He's found it! He's found the weapon!" Harry had screamed. Though the others doubted, it proved true. The connection, then, was a double-edged sword. It brought knowledge, but it cost peace. A child carried the hatred of the most feared wizard of the age. Snape, ever the reluctant protector, was the first to identify the danger. He was ordered to teach Harry occlumency to shield his mind from further intrusion. But the lessons failed. Whether due to Harry's lack of discipline or the Horcrux's resistance, Voldemort still slipped through, and with every dream, every spike of pain, the line between hunter and hunted blurred. It was Dumbledore who recognized the true nature of the bond. "You are the seventh Horcrux," he would one day say. The impact of this truth was catastrophic. Not only did Harry bear the burden of the prophecy, but he harbored the soul of the enemy. It explained why the Sorting Hat had considered Slytherin for him. It explained his sudden instincts, the desire to prove himself, to fight, to survive at any cost. Part of Voldemort's ambition had seeped into him. It was never just nurture, it was contamination. And the price of that contamination was mental clarity. During Half-Blood Prince, the connection changed. Voldemort, now aware of the link, began to shield himself, but in doing so he also distorted the bond. Harry felt numb. The absence was almost worse than the presence. It was like losing a limb, he thought. That loss revealed just how dependent he'd become on the echo within him. He had used the connection like a compass, like a weapon. Without it, he was blind. The Horcrux, though uninvited, had become familiar. It had given him an edge. The most terrifying realization came at the climax of Deathly Hallows. As Harry walked into the Forbidden Forest to face death, he finally understood. He must die, not because he was weak, but because he was carrying something evil. The Horcrux inside him would never allow Voldemort to be truly mortal. And so he accepted death, not to fulfill prophecy, but to cleanse himself. "I must die," he told himself. "It's the only way." When Voldemort cast the killing curse, the Horcrux inside Harry was destroyed. It was in the King's Cross dreamscape that Harry met Dumbledore again, and the truth was fully revealed. The thing lying under the bench, the small, flayed creature, was what had lived inside him. "Do not pity the dead, Harry," Dumbledore said. "Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." That creature had been inside him all his life. The Horcrux was not just a passenger. It had shaped him, it had given, and it had taken. Number 17 Horcruxes can affect their environment. In the world of dark magic, there are few creations more sinister than Horcruxes. They are not simply objects of evil. They are pieces of shattered humanity, cursed remnants of a soul torn apart by murder. Yet beyond the horror of their creation lies a lesser discussed truth, one even more insidious in its implications. A Horcrux doesn't just house a soul fragment, it infects the very space it inhabits. It lingers like a shadow on the wall, silent and malevolent, altering the atmosphere, the minds, and the emotions of those who draw too close. Perhaps the most haunting realization is this: the soul's damage is not limited to the one who tore it. It continues to corrode everything in its path. One need look no further than the locket of Salazar Slytherin to witness this phenomenon. For months, Harry, Ron, and Hermione carried this cursed heirloom across forests, fields, and hills, unaware at first that they were carrying more than just a magical object. The locket exuded a presence, imperceptible at first, like a scent of something rotting beneath the floorboards. Over time, its influence grew stronger, turning mild irritations into smouldering arguments, fears into obsessions, doubts into daggers. The trio was never the same while the Horcrux was near. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Rowling writes, "The locket was now a heavy weight against his chest. It felt as if it were trying to smother his heart." This wasn't poetic exaggeration. It was literal emotional suffocation. The locket fed on insecurity and despair. Ron, the most emotionally volatile of the three, was the first to break. The whispers of inadequacy, of jealousy, of inferiority were no longer just his inner thoughts. They were amplified, sharpened, looped until unbearable. He left. Not because he wanted to, but because the Horcrux made him feel unwanted. It wasn't only Ron who suffered. Hermione, ever composed, began to lose her emotional clarity. Her sharp intellect became clouded by dread. She doubted their mission, doubted their safety, doubted even her choices. The locket wasn't content to remain a passive passenger. It actively undermined its bearers. And Harry, burdened by a destiny he never asked for, felt the sting most intimately. He saw visions, heard lies, was haunted by fears that he was becoming like Voldemort. The Horcrux did what Dementors do, only worse. It didn't suck happiness, it twisted it. It turned love into dependency, loyalty into suspicion, unity into conflict. The trio quickly discovered that the only way to lessen the pain was to take turns wearing the locket. They passed it around like a poison no one wanted to drink too long. But even then the damage accumulated. The energy of the object soaked into the air, like fog that clings to everything. In the quiet moments by the campfire, nothing was ever truly calm. A sense of dread clung to the earth, whispering through the leaves, tightening their throats. It wasn't the cold, it was the Horcrux. This phenomenon wasn't confined to the locket. Every Horcrux that came into contact with the world left scars behind. Marvolo Gaunt's ring was cursed so severely that even Albus Dumbledore, one of the greatest wizards of the age, nearly lost his life to its touch. When he slipped it on, if only for a moment, it consumed his hand in blackened, dying flesh. But the curse wasn't just physical, it lingered in his body, spreading, gnawing. It was death in slow motion. The ring may have been elegant in appearance, but it was a tomb in disguise. Tom Riddle's diary revealed another layer of this strange influence. When Ginny Weasley poured her thoughts and soul into it, the diary didn't simply listen, it drank from her. Slowly it drained her life force, her will, her voice. It didn't need proximity to corrupt, it needed emotional openness. That diary didn't just whisper, it dictated. Ginny lost time, lost memory, lost self. It wasn't a mere possession, it was an occupation. A Horcrux doesn't have to move to infiltrate. It seeps. Rowling wrote of Ginny. She knew there was something wrong with her. It was as though somebody else was making her do things. The influence was psychological, emotional, and magical, all at once. Riddle's soul fragment latched onto her vulnerabilities like a parasite, living in her fears, hiding in her need for understanding. It didn't control her like a puppet, it made her feel as if the strings were her own. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff was hidden in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, yet even there, surrounded by piles of treasure and enchantments, it seemed to infect its space. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione broke into the vault, the atmosphere turned oppressive. The multiplying curses weren't just spells, they felt like a reflection of the Horcrux's chaotic presence. There was no order, no peace, no logic. The air shimmered with panic. When the cup was finally destroyed by Hermione with a basilisk fang, the scream that erupted was inhuman. It didn't just sound like pain, it sounded like rage. The soul fragment did not want to die, it wanted to take them all with it. Dumbledore understood this better than anyone. He didn't just seek to destroy the Horcruxes because they were containers of Voldemort's soul. He sought to remove them from the world because they were corrupting forces. Even when dormant, their mere presence was a danger. They were bombs that leaked poison. He told Harry, "I think I may know what the final Horcrux is, but it must be kept secret for now. I do not want it touching your life more than it must." He was protecting Harry not from knowledge, but from proximity. The corruption was more than symbolic. It had tangible effects on space. Grimmauld Place, where the locket was hidden, felt heavy with sorrow and secrecy. Even without knowing the Horcrux was there, the house seemed to breathe in dread. The walls were soaked with hatred. The portrait of Walburga Black screamed endlessly. The air was stale, thick with resentment. It was not just an old house, it was a house haunted by presence. The Horcrux didn't cause all of it, but it deepened every shadow. This atmospheric influence aligns closely with the effects of Dementors. While Dementors remove happiness, Horcruxes twist reality to reflect the torment within. Dementors feed, while Horcruxes infest. Both are tools of despair, but the Horcrux is subtler and more invasive. Its corruption builds over time, hiding in the background, until one's very thoughts begin to align with its malevolence. Unlike Dementors, a Horcrux doesn't need to be alive to destroy you. One can speculate that this is because the soul, even when fractured, retains its core identity. Voldemort's soul was a maelstrom of hate, fear, pride, and control. Every object bearing his soul became a transmitter of these qualities. The Horcrux is not just an echo, it is a broadcast. It sends out frequencies of dread. It doesn't speak, but you hear it, you feel it, in the pit of your stomach, in the back of your mind, in the tremor in your hand when you touch the thing too long. The sword of Gryffindor, in contrast, absorbed only that which strengthened it. It drank basilisk venom and thus became capable of destroying Horcruxes. It is the perfect antithesis to these cursed artifacts, a weapon forged in bravery and purity, capable of erasing that which defies natural law. In contrast, the Horcrux is the corruption of legacy. The cup, the diadem, the locket, they were once proud heirlooms, now reduced to carriers of suffering. A Horcrux doesn't just taint magic, it defiles history. The diadem of Ravenclaw, hidden in the Room of Requirement, infected that room in subtle ways. Though used by generations of students, its energy began to twist the space into a hoarder's nightmare, full of forgotten things, as though memory itself was being consumed. When the diadem was destroyed, the fire it unleashed was no ordinary flame. It was fiend fire, a wild, living inferno, perhaps the only fire destructive enough to match the intensity of the magic it was undoing. The Horcrux burned with a resistance that suggested consciousness. They don't die easily because they are not dead things. It is worth noting how many of the Horcruxes were hidden in places already burdened by secrets. The cave on the cliff, the vault beneath Gringotts, the cursed shack of the Gaunts. Voldemort didn't just hide his soul, he placed it in environments where darkness already festered. It was camouflage, but it also amplified the natural gloom of those places. The cave where he forced a child to drink a cursed potion was not just dark, it became darker after the locket was placed there. The Inferi in the lake were not just guards, they were echoes of the locket's emotional resonance. Still, silent, lifeless, like the soul it carried. When Harry finally faced the truth that he himself was an accidental Horcrux, the ultimate horror came not from fear of death, but from the understanding of what he had carried within him. His connection to Voldemort was not simply a scar, it was a link to an ever-present shadow. The dreams, the anger, the involuntary glimpses into Voldemort's mind were not accidental, they were symptoms. He was infected. That fragment made him feel what no child should ever feel, that he was becoming the thing he hated most. In the end, every Horcrux was destroyed, but the scars remained. Ron's insecurities never fully vanished. Hermione carried guilt over how close they came to turning on one another. Harry, though triumphant, walked with the weight of knowing he had housed evil. These objects didn't simply need to be destroyed, they had to be survived. That is the true horror of a Horcrux. Not that it can be made, but that it lingers. It stains the soul, the room, the moment. Perhaps the most frightening fact of all is this: if even a fragment of soul can poison reality, what does that say about the power of the soul itself? And what becomes of a world where souls are torn and scattered like ash in the wind? Would you recognize the influence of a Horcrux if you stood near one? Or would you simply begin to feel different? A little more impatient? A little more suspicious? A little more alone? Number 18, Voldemort wanted to turn Gryffindor's sword into a Horcrux. Of all the secrets buried in the shadows of the Second Wizarding War, few are as disturbing and as darkly symbolic as the one tied to the sword of Godric Gryffindor. While most witches and wizards know that Lord Voldemort fragmented his soul into 7 pieces and sealed them into objects known as Horcruxes, what they may not know is that he once considered an unthinkable choice for one of those Horcruxes, the legendary sword itself. This was not simply a tactical decision, it was a gesture of desecration. Voldemort wanted to defile a symbol of light and valor, twisting it into a vessel for his own mutilated soul. The sword was no ordinary weapon. Forged centuries ago by goblin metalworkers, the sword of Gryffindor had absorbed the courage and feats of countless Gryffindors through the years. It had once appeared to Harry Potter in the Chamber of Secrets, glittering with rubies when he most needed it. According to Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the sword had absorbed that which made it stronger. It had taken in basilisk venom, rendering it capable of destroying Horcruxes. But Voldemort's plan was older than the events of that final book. It dated back to the years before his rise to true power, and it was steeped in irony and contempt. Voldemort was obsessed with powerful magical relics, especially those tied to Hogwarts founders. He had already collected Helga Hufflepuff's cup and Salazar Slytherin's locket. Ravenclaw's diadem had been turned into a Horcrux and hidden in the Room of Requirement. But Godric Gryffindor, representing the values Voldemort loathed, bravery, nobility, self-sacrifice, remained unspoiled. The sword, which bore Gryffindor's name, was the perfect target. It wasn't enough for Voldemort to kill. He wanted to humiliate. Turning a sacred object of heroism into a container for his soul would have been, in his mind, the ultimate victory over the legacy of Gryffindor. What Voldemort didn't know, what infuriated him later, was that the sword he sought was no longer where he thought it was. The goblins of Gringotts, skilled in deception when it served their interests, kept a replica in their vault. When Bellatrix Lestrange showed him the sword in her family vault at Gringotts, he believed to be the real thing. But Albus Dumbledore, ever the strategist, had secretly hidden the real sword away. He knew that the time might come when the sword would be needed, not just as a weapon, but as a key to undoing Voldemort's twisted legacy. This secret plan by Voldemort illuminates the depths of his moral decay. He did not merely seek immortality, he sought to pervert everything that stood for hope. His mind operated on a logic warped by supremacy and cruelty. He believed that desecrating Gryffindor's legacy would prove that no ideal, no relic, no virtue was incorruptible. It would send a message not just to his enemies, but to history itself. In the Deathly Hallows, Griphooked the Goblin reveals his suspicion that the sword in Bellatrix's vault is fake. That is not the true sword, he insists. It was taken from her vault by Albus Dumbledore. The sword of Gryffindor is goblin-made. Griphook's words confirm Dumbledore's secret act of misdirection, but they also hint at something more chilling. Voldemort had been preparing to use the sword for his own ends. Though not explicitly stated in the books, the implications are buried in his obsession with Hogwarts relics and his fascination with domination over the school's legacy. The goblins' reverence for the sword was rooted in their own culture. They considered goblin-made artifacts to rightfully belong to their makers, not to those who acquired them by purchase or gift. Voldemort, though he understood many kinds of power, failed to understand the nuances of goblin craft. He assumed the sword would remain hidden in Bellatrix's vault forever. That arrogance cost him dearly. Imagine the symbolic horror if Voldemort had succeeded. The very sword that once helped Harry slay a basilisk that presented itself only to the worthy would have been defiled by anchoring a fragment of the Dark Lord's soul. It would have poisoned the very spirit of the object. More than just a magical artifact, the sword represented the heart of Gryffindor values. It answered only to courage, to those who placed others before themselves. To corrupt it would have been to declare war on the essence of bravery itself. One must wonder whether Voldemort truly believed the sword could contain a Horcrux. Goblin-made items resist enchantments not placed upon them at their creation. They absorb only what makes them stronger. Perhaps he planned to shroud the sword in dark magic or bury it somewhere steeped in death. Perhaps he never got far enough in his planning. But the desire was there, evident in his pursuit of Hogwarts artifacts, and in his fury when he learned that the sword had vanished from Bellatrix's vault. His plan crumbled thanks to Dumbledore's foresight. The headmaster, knowing how Voldemort's mind worked, anticipated the value he would place on Hogwarts relics. In hiding the sword and substituting a replica, Dumbledore not only protected an object of immense power but preserved its purity. That decision later allowed Harry and his friends to use the sword to destroy the Horcruxes, turning Voldemort's plan against him. The irony is almost poetic. Voldemort, who intended to twist the sword to serve darkness, was instead undone by it. The same blade he hoped to pervert became the very tool used to dismantle his immortality. Ron Weasley destroyed the locket with it. Hermione Granger used it to destroy the cup. Even Nagini, Voldemort's final Horcrux, fell in the end thanks to the sword's influence, though wielded by Neville Longbottom through the very bravery Godric Gryffindor prized. This reversal is not just narrative justice, it's thematic brilliance. The sword, unyielding in its loyalty to courage, refused to be tainted. It aligned itself only with those who proved their worth. Voldemort, though powerful, was never brave. His life was built on fear, fear of death, fear of weakness, fear of love, and so the sword rejected him, eluded him, and eventually destroyed what he thought could never die. In Voldemort's quest for domination, his understanding of magic was vast, but his comprehension of moral power was absent. He could not fathom that certain objects bore intentions, that some magic could not be bent to his will. He assumed that all things could be owned, all symbols corrupted. But the sword of Gryffindor, like the virtues it embodied, slipped through his fingers. There is no explicit passage in the books declaring that Voldemort tried to make the sword a Horcrux. But in the Deathly Hallows, his panic upon learning that the sword in the Lestrange vault is a fake speaks volumes. "They have the sword," he hisses in rage. "They could destroy it. They could destroy them all." The them refers to his Horcruxes. But the sword was more than a threat to his plans. It was a missing piece in a perverse puzzle he never got to complete. This near attempt reinforces a recurring theme in J.K. Rowling's world. Power without understanding leads to downfall. Voldemort's greatest weakness was never just his soul's fragmentation, it was his blindness to what made true magic powerful. He saw the sword as a trophy, a relic, to bend to his purpose. But the sword answered to another kind of call, one he could never make. Even more tragic is how close he came. Had the sword remained in the vault, had Dumbledore not foreseen the future, Voldemort might have eventually retrieved it. Perhaps he would have tried to kill with it, claiming its magic for his own. Perhaps he would have succeeded in cursing it. But fate, or something more ancient than fate, protected the sword. Its destiny was written long before Voldemort's rise, and no amount of darkness could rewrite that. In the end, the true sword passed only to the worthy: Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville. Each of them stood for what Voldemort could not comprehend: friendship, sacrifice, loyalty. The sword moved through the hands of the brave, becoming a beacon of resistance. Its very presence burned through the lies Voldemort had woven around himself. What makes this story more chilling is how close the magical world came to losing that beacon. Had Voldemort succeeded, history would have recorded the sword of Gryffindor as a desecrated object, a relic tarnished by evil. Instead, it remained uncorrupted, a testament to the idea that even in war, not all sacred things are lost. Some resist, some endure. The tale of the sword's near corruption is not just a historical curiosity. It is a warning, a reflection on the fragility of symbols and the strength they require to stay pure. Voldemort saw the sword as a means, Dumbledore saw it as a shield, and Harry, he saw it as hope. So the next time you imagine Voldemort's Horcruxes, picture what might have been: a blood-stained sword in a dark vault, pulsing with stolen life. But remember what was: a gleaming blade, hidden in silence, waiting for a hand brave enough to draw it. That is the sword's legacy, and it will never belong to darkness. Number 19, you can hear the soul inside a Horcrux. It was in the dark recesses of the Room of Requirement that Harry Potter first heard it, a whisper so faint and so sinister that it seemed more like a trick of the shadows than a sound. He had entered the room searching for the lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw, the ancient relic that few living people had ever seen and fewer still had touched. The room had transformed into a cathedral of forgotten things, stacks of broken furniture, mouldering books, shattered glass, and layers of dust so thick they dulled the magic in the air. But amid this chaos, Harry felt a strange vibration, not of the walls or floor, but of his mind. Then he heard it, a whisper, not in English, not in parcel tongue, not even in words. It was a sensation of being watched from within, of something aware and waiting, something that had no mouth but knew how to speak. This moment, never fully explained in the text, has fascinated readers for years, and many now believe what once was only theory. Horcruxes don't just contain pieces of Voldemort's soul. They are alive in their own dreadful way. They can think and they can speak. We must remember the diadem's placement in the Room of Requirement was not random. Tom Riddle, ever obsessed with the concept of eternal legacy, chose that hiding place because it reflected his pride and cunning. But the darkness that lingered around the diadem was not merely metaphorical. When Harry sensed it, he was not detecting dark magic through sight or smell. He was hearing something not meant to be heard. There is precedent for this effect. The diary of Tom Riddle did far more than store a fragment of soul. It communicated, it seduced, it controlled. Through written words and invisible influence, it reached into Ginny Weasley's fears and secrets and made her speak to it. But unlike the diary, the diadem had no ink or pages to speak through. It had no mechanism of interaction, yet it still called out. The whisper Harry heard was not a spell. It wasn't legilimency or a magical alarm. It was the soul itself, splintered, trapped, and furious. When Voldemort split his soul to create Horcruxes, he tore it into unstable parts. Those parts retained not just magic, but fragments of thought, fragments of memory, and fragments of voice. The voice Harry heard near the diadem was the echo of Voldemort's mind, repeating, watching, whispering. When Harry later destroyed the Horcrux hidden inside the locket, another moment of terrible clarity occurred. As Ron Weasley drove the sword of Gryffindor into the dark metal object, a vision burst forth, a scream, a cloud of horrors, images designed to torment and manipulate. The soul inside did not merely die, it fought, it spoke in images and pain, and when it was silenced, the room felt emptier, as if a presence had left. The voice in the locket was different than the one in the diary, different than the one in the ring. Each fragment of Voldemort's soul carried its own mood, its own level of awareness. The diary was charming, articulate, even seductive. The locket was cruel, paranoid, and mocking. The ring was more secretive, more inert, but still radiated menace. Each Horcrux was not just a piece of a whole, they were fractured consciousnesses, each battling silently in their prisons. This suggests that Voldemort's soul, divided again and again, did not merely split, it fractured emotionally. Just as a person suffering trauma can manifest different states of mind, each Horcrux became an island of isolation. In time, they grew personalities of their own, distorted and deformed by imprisonment and purpose. Some of them spoke when they could, others waited in silence. Consider the case of Helena Ravenclaw, the ghost who once wore the very diadem Harry sought. She said, "I stole the diadem from my mother. I sought to make myself cleverer, more important than her." But even in death, she could feel the stain upon the relic. "It is lost, hidden in a place where everything is hidden," she whispered. Her reluctance to speak about the diadem wasn't just guilt, it was fear. Something clung to the object, something that could still whisper even in the quietest room. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore speaks of Horcruxes with grave concern. He warns that they are unnatural, evil in the extreme, but he does not fully explore their sentience. He notes their resistance to destruction and their corrupting nature. Yet what he does not say, and what readers have begun to understand, is that Horcruxes are not passive. They wait, they watch, and they whisper. That whisper is not just metaphor. Sensitive individuals, those attuned to the currents of magic, seem to feel it more. Ginny Weasley was a child, alone and frightened when she heard Tom Riddle speak through the diary. Harry, who bore a fragment of Voldemort's soul within him, felt the diadem's whisper even before he saw it. Ron, insecure and easily influenced, heard the locket's cruel voice clearer than others. These aren't coincidences. Horcruxes target fear and weakness. They probe for entry points, and when they find them, they speak. The whisper is more than a sound. It is a mental vibration, a chill along the spine, a shadow behind thought. In the Forbidden Forest, when Harry walks alone to meet his death, the piece of soul inside him stirs. It does not whisper then, it waits, sensing its end. But when it dies, Harry hears Voldemort scream, not from across the clearing, but from inside himself. The death of a Horcrux is loud, but the voice itself, the voice is ancient, buried in layers of magic so foul they cling like cobwebs to the senses. When Hermione read about Horcruxes in Secrets of the Darkest Art, the book was banned for a reason. Not just because of the knowledge, but because even the words carried echoes of the soul-wounding magic. Those who made Horcruxes often suffered madness, not from guilt, but from noise. The whisper follows them. It begins as a faint thought, then a suggestion, then a presence. Imagine living with a splinter of your soul, screaming in a box buried miles away. Imagine the sound never stopping. This is what Voldemort endured. This is why he became obsessed with silence and death. His Horcruxes were not trophies. They were his torment. When Nagini became a Horcrux, her behavior changed. More than a pet, she became an extension of his mind, more loyal, more vicious, but also more haunted. She flicked her tongue at empty air, coiled restlessly in the night, aware of things no snake should know. It's no coincidence that she was kept so close. Her whispers were too important, too terrifying. And when Harry, Ron, and Hermione destroyed the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, the same pattern unfolded. A shriek, a vision, a presence leaving. It always ended the same way, not like breaking a charm, not like undoing a hex, but like executing a prisoner. There is no magical term for this whisper. It is not veritaserum. It is not legilimency. It is not divination. It is something darker, the echo of pain made permanent, and those sensitive enough, those broken, open, or attuned, can hear. There is even suggestion that Horcruxes influence the air around them. When Umbridge wore the locket at the Ministry, she grew crueler, not just in ambition, but in mood. The soul inside fed on her worst parts and magnified them. She did not hear a whisper, because she was the whisper. The voice need not always be external. Sometimes it becomes thought. This makes us ask a frightening question. Are those who destroy Horcruxes changed by what they hear? Ron was never the same after the locket. He faced his deepest fears in the form of Hermione's rejection. He heard her laugh. He saw his absence made her happy. That was no accident. That was the Horcrux choosing the right words to break him. Ron destroyed it, but at a cost. And Harry? He heard Voldemort long before he ever saw him. His dreams were filled with whispers, his thoughts interrupted by pain. The scar was not just a mark. It was a speaker, a receiver. And when the final Horcrux inside him was destroyed, the silence must have been deafening. The voice of the Horcrux is not a spell. It is not a charm. It is despair given shape. And it waits for those who dare to listen. And what of the rest of us? We read these stories and wonder, what would we have heard standing in the room of requirement with the diadem in hand? What would the voice have whispered to us? Perhaps that is why the whisper remains so haunting, because it is not only Voldemort we fear, it is the sound of our own weakness waiting to be spoken aloud. Number 20. Some wizards believed Horcruxes were enlightenment. For most of the wizarding world, the word Horcrux summons only dread. associated with unspeakable acts, soul mutilation, and the infamy of Lord Voldemort, it is little more than a dark whisper passed through trembling lips. But within the forgotten alcoves of magical history, tucked away in the shadows between the official curriculum of Hogwarts and the banned tomes of the restricted section, lies a secret that challenges the simplicity of this view. Not all witches and wizards considered Horcrux creation a monstrous perversion. Some believed it to be the pinnacle of magical evolution, a misunderstood act of transcending mortality. Among the ancient scrolls preserved in the remote archives of the French magical monastery of Saint-Lazare-des-Sceaux, scholars uncovered fragments of what is now known as the philosophy of fracture, a doctrine once espoused by the excommunicated dark philosopher Thormodus Pirenne. A former student of Durmstrang, Pirenne was expelled in the 14th century for conducting soul severance experiments on magical animals, yet in exile he penned his now banned treatise De Divisione Animae, which proposed a bold, some say blasphemous, reimagining of the soul's role in magical transcendence. Pirenne argued that the soul, like magic itself, was never meant to remain whole. To fracture is to evolve, he wrote. To divide is to distribute light across time. He believed that by segmenting the soul and anchoring it to the physical world, a wizard could create not just immortality, but a kind of omnipresence. Pieces of the self could witness different eras, absorb different truths, and collectively return to the source at death, if the soul was later reunited. In this framework, a Horcrux wasn't a desecration. It was a seed planted in time. Centuries later, Pirenne's name was erased from most magical history texts, but his ideas persisted in secret. In the 1700s, a German occultist named Ilse Gauss reinterpreted Pirenne's work into what she called ecosophy. A silent scholar of the Munich Institute for Obscure Enchantments, Gauss believed that fragments of the soul could act as emotional archives, preserving grief, love, fear, and wisdom for future generations. The soul, she wrote in a confiscated notebook, is a vessel too vast for one life. Her theory suggested that by anchoring specific emotional states in carefully chosen objects, one could create magical conduits through which descendants might access ancestral memories. Her most controversial experiment involved the locket of her deceased brother Otto, who died tragically in a potion accident. Gauss, overwhelmed by grief and guided by Pirenne's writings, extracted a small portion of her soul during mourning and enchanted the locket with it. She documented a series of vivid dreams and emotional visions experienced by her great-niece, Lena, years later, all centered on Otto's final moments. To Gauss, this was proof. She had succeeded in sending part of herself and Otto forward through time. Of course, Gauss's work was condemned. In 1813, the International Confederation of Wizards confiscated her writings and labeled them soul corruption artifacts. But the idea had already taken root. Small secret circles in Prague, Florence, and Alexandria began studying similar rites, not for immortality, but for legacy. These groups referred to their work as fragmentation rites, not horcruxes, deliberately avoiding the term that would later become synonymous with Voldemort's atrocities. And Voldemort's approach indeed marked a rupture from any philosophical nuance. His horcruxes, the Tid diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, Nagini, and a piece within Harry Potter, were forged through murder, pain, and cold utilitarianism. He did not seek enlightenment, he feared death. As Dumbledore said in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, he was ripped from his proper body. More ghost than human, less than the meanest ghost. Yet even within this condemnation, Dumbledore acknowledged something peculiar. Lord Voldemort was perhaps the most brilliant student Hogwarts ever had. Such a mind, driven by a deep need for control, may have been drawn, knowingly or not, to ideas long buried. Whether Voldemort encountered Pirenne's writings is uncertain, but his choice of Horcrux objects, deeply personal, historically rich, symbolically charged, suggests an awareness of something more than mere utility. Consider the diary. When young Ginny Weasley poured her soul unknowingly into its pages, the fragment of Tom Riddle responded with memories, charisma, manipulation. This was more than a hidden life-preserver. It was a manifestation of consciousness, a shadow self-capable of independent interaction. Voldemort had created not just a Horcrux, but a projection of identity, a dark echo, reminiscent of Ilse Gauss's theories, twisted beyond recognition. More intriguing still is the discovery in 1998, after the Second Wizarding War, of a sealed chamber beneath the Department of Mysteries, labelled simply Anima non integra, Latin for the soul not whole. Inside were objects of unknown origin, all enchanted with a faint, pulsing magic. Among them, a comb inscribed with ancient runes, a child's wooden soldier with a cracked face, and a stone pendant that whispered when touched. The Unspeakables, bound by oath, released no formal statement. But rumours emerged that these were ancient precursors to Horcruxes, possibly dating to the time of Egyptian magical dynasties, when the separation of spirit and ka was part of funerary tradition. In fact, some scholars believe that the ancient Egyptian spellbooks, now buried in the vaults of the British Museum's Department of Arcane History, may contain the earliest references to soul division as ritual magic. One damaged scroll, translated by cursebreaker Tamsin Rawle in 1921, reads, "To leave part of oneself in the world is to guard the future with the past. Let the soul drink from stone, metal, blood, and bone." Whether metaphor or instruction, the phrase bears an eerie resemblance to modern Horcrux creation, but the magical community, for the most part, has chosen to forget these theories. The trauma of Voldemort's reign, the horrific deaths, and the desecration of innocence rendered all discussions of soul division taboo. To suggest there might be another interpretation, a higher, even noble purpose, is to court exile from magical scholarship. Yet as history shows, ideas do not die easily, they sleep. In 2007, a controversial paper was anonymously submitted to the Journal of Magical Philosophy. Titled Fractured Light, Rethinking Horcrux Theory, it argued that Voldemort's crimes should not blind the community to older, more nuanced views. "We must," it stated, "separate the act from the intent. We ban the blade because of the killer, not the surgeon." The paper was withdrawn under pressure, but not before gaining a small cult following among younger scholars disillusioned by the ministry's rigidity. One such scholar, Alaric Moon, a former Ravenclaw and expert in magical anthropology, began compiling oral histories in Eastern Europe. In a forgotten Moldovan village, he encountered an old woman named Serena Draculesti, who claimed her family had passed down soul stones for 9 generations. According to her, each stone held a whisper from an ancestor, not a ghost, but a truth. When Moon touched one, he experienced what he later described as a burst of memory not my own. "I was grieving the loss of a child, though I have none." Was this a Horcrux? Or something older, purer? Moon's findings were dismissed as anecdotal, and he later vanished under mysterious circumstances while exploring catacombs in Istanbul. Some say he sought a rumoured grimoire, Codex Partitorum, said to contain lost rituals of soul-sharing, not soul-breaking. Whether the codex exists remains unknown, but Moon's final notes, published posthumously, contain a haunting phrase: "Perhaps the soul is not meant to be caged in one life." The wizarding world, for now, clings to certainty. Horcrux equals evil. Voldemort is the cautionary tale. Yet, just beneath the surface, ancient voices continue to murmur that to divide is not always to destroy, that to leave behind a piece of yourself might not be vanity, but devotion. Could there be magic, yet untapped, a kind of light hidden within shadow? Could the terrible ritual Voldemort used be a perversion of something once sacred? And if so, who will dare search for its truth? Because magic, like the soul, resists simplicity. Number 21, a Horcrux, may be hidden in the Hogwarts library. In the shadowy corners of Hogwarts, beyond the stone corridors where students chatter and portraits argue softly with one another, lies a place few dare to enter, the restricted section of the library. Guarded by spells, warnings, and the ever-watchful gaze of Madame Pince, this secluded wing has long been the source of whispered rumours. Among the most chilling of them is the persistent theory that a Horcrux, one not created by Lord Voldemort, once rested within the pages of a forbidden tome, a relic from an older darkness, a Horcrux from the age of Gerbold the Ghastly, or, as he was known among the few who studied true dark magic, Herpo the Foul. Herpo the Foul, the ancient and terrifying dark wizard from Greece, is widely believed to have been the first to discover the concept of splitting the soul. He was the first to create a Horcrux, Professor Slughorn once told his students, though his voice shook slightly as he said it. While Voldemort admired Herpo, emulated him, and even surpassed him in cruelty, it was Herpo who pioneered the dreadful ritual. And it is Herpo who may have left behind something more than legend, a shard of soul buried not in gold, but in parchment. The book was said to be bound in basilisk hide, a thick, leathery cover that shimmered faintly green in candlelight. Its title had long worn away, its spine cracked by centuries of handling, and its contents, written in an archaic form of Greek, had never been fully translated. No professor would admit to having read it in full. Some claimed it emitted a low hum when touched. Others whispered that simply opening the book caused flickering shadows to dance unnaturally on the walls. In the 1920s, a particularly gifted Ravenclaw student named Elspeth Wren reportedly began experiencing disturbing dreams after repeated visits to the restricted section. She had been granted special permission to study ancient magical texts for her thesis on protective wards. After weeks of exhaustive research, she began to suffer sleepless nights. She claimed she heard voices murmuring to her in the dark and saw blood-red script written on her dormitory walls that vanished by dawn. According to a letter recovered from her trunk after she vanished in 1926, Elspeth had come across a book titled The Lamentation of the Serpent. She wrote of a sense of being watched and that the book's pages seemed to bleed ink. "It is not ink," she wrote, "but memory, something that speaks to me, or through me." Elspeth was never seen again. The book she described has never been catalogued by the library. In 1943, another case emerged. At the same time, Tom Riddle discovered the Chamber of Secrets. Several books were mysteriously reported missing by Madame Pince, books she swore she had locked away herself. One in particular left her deeply unsettled, according to a note she sent to Headmaster Dippet. She wrote that she had found it lying open on the floor, its pages steaming slightly in the cold dungeon air. "I could smell blood," she wrote, "and I was not alone in that room." Some scholars believe that this unidentified book may have been the same one Elspeth encountered. If true, then the Horcrux, if it was a Horcrux, had survived nearly 2 decades, passed from hand to hand in secrecy. What's more troubling is that Tom Riddle, who had not yet begun creating Horcruxes of his own, may have read this forbidden work. It is possible, some suggest, that his understanding of soul magic did not come from Herpo's biography or Salazar Slytherin's relics alone, but from first-hand experience with an object of pure corruption. There are no records of the book being destroyed. Some suspect Dumbledore himself may have encountered it in the years following Riddle's graduation. Dumbledore's increased presence in the library during the late 1940s and his reorganization of the restricted section are seen by some as attempts to locate and contain something dangerous. "He believed knowledge must be preserved," said Bathilda Bagshot in a private note found among her papers, "but he also knew when it was too dangerous to be touched." During Harry Potter's years at Hogwarts, the restricted section remained a source of fascination. When Harry first used his invisibility cloak to sneak past the sleeping librarian and peer into books on the dark arts, he stumbled across one that screamed when opened. This was no mere enchantment for security. It suggested that the books themselves had been cursed. Could it be, some theorized, that this protective spell was placed by Dumbledore himself, not to warn off curious students, but to suppress the voice within a page? The theory becomes more haunting when considering the behavior of some students who spent excessive time in the restricted section. In 1992, the same year the Chamber of Secrets was reopened, a third-year student named Nathaniel Rosier a distant cousin of Evan Rosier, one of Voldemort's Death Eaters, was treated in the hospital wing for persistent delusions and sleep paralysis. He had been researching possession for a defense against the dark arts essay, but was later found in a corridor, clutching a shredded book to his chest and mumbling incoherently. His notes referenced a mirror of words and pages that whisper. There are no mentions of this incident in any official report, and Rosier was quietly transferred to Durmstrang that same year. The atmosphere in the restricted section has often been described as colder than the rest of the castle, even when the hearths burn nearby. Students sometimes report that their wands flicker or dim when inside it. Luna Lovegood once remarked, "There's a sadness in that room, like something missing itself." Most dismissed this as one of her strange musings, but others wonder if her sensitivity to magical traces picked up what others could not. If a Horcrux had been hidden inside a book, its effects might have been more subtle than those of the diary Harry encountered in his second year. Rather than possessing someone directly, it could influence emotions, plant disturbing thoughts, or foster fear. Dumbledore once said Horcruxes can defend themselves. They have ways of manipulating those who come too close. If so, then such a book would not scream for attention, but softly draw its victim in page by page. One curious event often linked to this theory is the disappearance of a first edition of Secrets of the Darkest Art, a book known to contain instructions for creating a Horcrux. Hermione Granger found a copy in the library during the hunt for Voldemort's Horcruxes, but later remarked, "There should have been more than one copy, but I could only find one." This raises the possibility that the original, perhaps the one annotated by Herpo himself, was hidden or removed long ago. Another telling clue lies in a now-forgotten magical seal etched into the floor beneath a bookstand in the restricted section. Discovered briefly during repairs after the Battle of Hogwarts, the seal bore an ancient script that even Professor Babbling could not fully decipher. Some runes appeared to be protective spells, while others resembled containment charms used in ancient Egyptian tombs, charms meant to imprison spirits. The seal has since been covered, its meaning left to speculation. While no known Horcrux other than Voldemort's has been confirmed to exist, the magical world has long accepted that soul magic was not his invention. Herpo's experiments, and those of other dark magicians lost to time, suggest that Horcruxes may have been attempted, or even completed, centuries earlier. If so, then it's not unthinkable that one could have found its way to the shelves of Hogwarts through centuries of donations, confiscations, or even conquest. The castle itself, with its many secret rooms, shifting staircases, and walls that seem to breathe, could have easily hidden such a relic. The restricted section is only a fraction of the knowledge buried within Hogwarts, and books, unlike wands or amulets, are trusted. They're opened willingly, studied, memorized. If a Horcrux were embedded within a book, it could have been read 1,000 times before anyone realized what it truly was. Even more unsettling is the idea that Dumbledore, in all his wisdom, might have chosen not to destroy it. As someone who believed in the power of choice, in the redemption of even the darkest soul, he may have hoped the Horcrux was inert, or that it could teach future generations about the limits of magical power. Or perhaps he simply could not find it. As he once said, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Yet he spent many years poring over ancient texts, searching for fragments of truth. If the Horcrux still exists, its influence may still linger. Some students speak of headaches when near certain shelves. Others hear faint laughter or catch the scent of smoke with no fire in sight. The restricted section continues to be the heart of rumor and legend. And in a world where magic is shaped by intent and memory, perhaps a book, once steeped in evil, never truly dies. Was it a Horcrux? No one can say for certain. But the clues left behind, the disappearances, the madness, the strange marks, and the fear that clings to ink and paper, suggest that some truths were never meant to be catalogued. And in Hogwarts, where staircases move and ghosts roam, who's to say that a soul, torn and buried within a page, isn't still waiting to be read? Number 22, destroying a Horcrux can harm the destroyer. Of all the mysteries surrounding the creation and destruction of Horcruxes, perhaps the most unsettling is not how they are made, but what happens when they are destroyed. In the wizarding world, knowledge of Horcruxes is forbidden for a reason. These objects, infused with a piece of a soul, defy nature and morality. While most conversations revolve around how difficult they are to find and destroy, few discuss the deep emotional and mental toll exacted on the wizard who takes on the task. This cost is not merely physical. The truth, as few know, is that destroying a Horcrux can scar the mind of the one who does it, sometimes forever. Ron Weasley's experience with Salazar Slytherin's locket offers one of the clearest and most harrowing examples of this psychological damage. When he finally plunged the sword of Gryffindor into the locket, he wasn't simply performing a magical act of destruction. He was tearing apart a fragment of a soul, a sliver of Voldemort's malevolent essence. That act did not go unpunished. The locket did everything it could to defend itself, not through spells or enchantments, but by attacking Ron where he was most vulnerable, his mind. What followed was a barrage of visions and hallucinations that nearly broke him. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the description is vivid and unforgettable. As Ron stood over the Horcrux, it revealed to him his deepest insecurities. Harry and Hermione together mocking him, telling him he was not needed. The eyes of the locket glowed red, serpentine, filled with a cruel intelligence. It showed Ron a world in which he was unloved, second best, invisible. Least loved by the girl who prefers your friend, the locket hissed. These were not idle illusions. They were psychic attacks feeding on Ron's doubts and multiplying them. What made Ron's case particularly devastating was that these visions tapped into very real emotions. His fear that Harry and Hermione were closer to each other than to him, his jealousy, his sense of inadequacy, these were not conjured from nothing. The Horcrux didn't invent these thoughts, it amplified them. The effect was described by Hermione later as emotional poisoning. The object seeped into Ron's consciousness like venom, exploiting every weakness, and it left a mark. Ron's temporary departure from the group wasn't a choice made in rational thought. It was the result of cumulative psychological pressure. The Horcrux, worn for days, fed off him. When he finally left, he wasn't Ron Weasley, the friend and ally. He was a fractured, confused boy, overwhelmed by thoughts that weren't entirely his own. Only later, after destroying the locket, did he begin to piece himself back together, but even then, the scars remained. Harry noted that Ron seemed older, changed, perhaps permanently. This phenomenon is not unique to Ron, consider Dumbledore himself. Though he never destroyed a Horcrux directly, he handled Marvolo Gaunt's ring, a deadly artifact laced with dark enchantments and part of Voldemort's soul. The moment Dumbledore slipped it on, drawn by the resurrection stone embedded in it, he was cursed. The damage done to his hand was severe and irreversible, and Snape had to intervene quickly to contain the curse. But beyond the physical damage, one must ask, why did a man as wise and cautious as Dumbledore allow himself to be tempted by such an object? The answer lies in the subtle mental manipulations Horcruxes exert. Even Albus Dumbledore was not immune to longing, and the Horcrux found it. The resurrection stone offered him a chance, illusory though it was, to see his family again. He succumbed not because he was weak, but because the Horcrux exploited a lifetime of guilt and sorrow. This manipulation was not just passive temptation, it was an active warping of his mental state, proof that even the greatest minds can be undone by proximity to such dark magic. Harry Potter himself faced a prolonged exposure to Horcrux influence. For months he carried the locket around his neck. During this time his mood soured, his temper flared, and he found himself increasingly paranoid and angry. While he tried to rationalize these feelings, it became clear that the locket was poisoning his thoughts. He fought with Ron, distanced himself from Hermione, and brooded in silence. "I'm always angry these days," he admitted, unaware that he was being slowly consumed. The comparison to the One Ring from Tolkien's lore is not inappropriate. The locket weighed on Harry like a chain around his soul. It twisted his perception, making even his friends seem suspect. His moments of reflection were clouded by irrational dread and hopelessness. These were not normal emotional responses to their dire situation. They were amplified by the Horcrux's presence. When the locket was finally destroyed, a sense of release swept through him, like surfacing from deep water. But the emotional fatigue lingered. Perhaps the most telling example of the irreversible damage a Horcrux can do lies not in its destruction, but in its creation. Tom Riddle split his soul 7 times, creating multiple Horcruxes. Each act required a murder, but more than that, it required a consent to sever part of his very self. Over time, his appearance changed, his emotions dulled, and his humanity eroded. This transformation was not merely symbolic, it was magical degeneration, the decay of identity. When Harry sees Voldemort's soul fragment in King's Cross, the small, whimpering, wounded creature, it is described as something that cannot be helped, a part of Voldemort that was beyond salvation, rotted by his own choices. If creating a Horcrux degrades the soul, then destroying one inevitably affects the destroyer. They come into contact with something that was never meant to be touched, something that violates the natural laws of life and death. The fragment resists destruction because it is tethered by pain, hatred, and fear. When a wizard destroys it, they must endure that resistance. It is a psychic battle, not unlike occlumency, except that in this battle, the soul fights back. The sword of Gryffindor, imbued with basilisk venom, was one of the few weapons capable of destroying a Horcrux. But even with the right tool, the act itself was grueling. Ron's hands shook. He hesitated, terrified by what he saw in the locket. The imagery was so vivid, so cruel, that it took every ounce of strength he had to drive the sword home. He did it not with detachment, but with anguish. And that moment became a crucible in his character, a forging through trauma. Hermione Granger, though she never destroyed a Horcrux herself, witnessed the toll it took on her friends. She observed the changes in Ron, the deterioration in Harry's demeanor, and recorded them with clinical clarity. Her words, emotional poisoning, echo the way a skilled healer might describe the side effects of a dark potion. It was not a dramatic term, but an accurate one. The Horcruxes infected the mind, gradually eroding the victim's sense of self. This may explain why some wizards, even those well-versed in dark magic, never dared to seek out or destroy Horcruxes. They feared not the physical danger, but the cost to their psyche. For every Horcrux destroyed, the destroyer paid a price. Guilt, hallucinations, nightmares. These were reported in scattered testimonies, hidden in the restricted section, or passed down in whispers. Horace Slughorn, when pressed, admitted that the subject terrified him, and he had never even seen one. Even the destruction of the Hufflepuff cup in the Chamber of Secrets left its mark. Hermione and Ron barely escaped the tidal wave of enchanted fire conjured by Crabe's fiendfire, a magical blaze so wild it consumed the Horcrux, but almost consumed them as well. Fiend fire is chaotic, uncontrollable, and reflects the fury of its caster. To wield such magic is to gamble with one's soul. That they survived was a miracle. That they were unchanged? Unlikely. In the Battle of Hogwarts, Neville Longbottom decapitated Nagini, Voldemort's final Horcrux, with the same sword. In that moment, Neville became more than a hero. He became a soul slayer. The act was swift, but the burden was heavy. Killing a living creature is always traumatic. Killing a living Horcrux, a creature carrying part of a fractured soul, is something darker. Neville never spoke much about how it felt, but he, too, emerged quieter, older. The war aged them all, but the Horcruxes aged them most of all. The true danger of Horcruxes, then, lies not only in their durability or magical protections, but in their ability to unmake the minds of those who confront them. They do not explode, they do not curse, they unravel. Piece by piece, they dismantle the emotional scaffolding of their victims. They whisper doubts, feed insecurities, and exploit trauma. Destroying them is not just a physical feat, it is a trial of the spirit. When Harry finally faced the piece of soul inside himself, The encounter in the dreamlike King's Cross revealed a hidden truth. He, too, was a Horcrux. His life had been shaped by this parasite. His dreams, his visions of Voldemort, the pain in his scar, all of it was the consequence of carrying a cursed fragment. When it was destroyed by Voldemort's own killing curse, Harry felt neither pain nor loss. Instead, he felt release. It was as if something had been lifted, something that had always been with him but was never truly his. The wizarding world continues to fear Horcruxes, and rightfully so. But the fear must extend beyond their dark creation and delve into the madness they spread. A cursed object can be locked away, a damaged soul cannot. This is the legacy Voldemort left behind, not only death and destruction, but a psychological ruin that echoed long after his defeat. The destroyers of Horcruxes, Harry, Ron, Dumbledore, and Neville, emerged as heroes. But they also emerged wounded, touched by something too dark for words. Perhaps the final lesson lies in the words Dumbledore once spoke to Harry. "Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." Horcruxes are the embodiment of that loveless existence, and those who destroy them carry pieces of that darkness within them forever. Not because they wanted to, but because to fight such evil, one must touch it, and sometimes it touches back. Number 23. Voldemort had a favourite Horcrux. It was not the locket of Salazar Slytherin, nor the ancient cup of Helga Hufflepuff, and certainly not the gaudy diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw that Tom Marvolo Riddle loved most. Among all the Horcruxes he created in his terrifying pursuit of immortality, there was one that held more than just a fragment of soul. It held a fragment of his pride, his identity, his genius, and perhaps even his innocence. It was the diary, a seemingly unremarkable black-bound book gifted to Lucius Malfoy with chilling confidence. And yet, to Voldemort, it was the jewel of his collection. The diary of Tom Riddle was not merely an object of dark magic. It was, in many ways, his first successful experiment in splitting the soul, the beginning of the long road that would render him inhuman. Unlike his later Horcruxes, which became trophies or tokens hidden away in secret, the diary was intended to act. It was not meant to remain inert. It was designed with a purpose, to open the Chamber of Secrets once again and cleanse Hogwarts of what he saw as filth, Muggleborns who, in his twisted ideology, tainted the bloodline of magic. When Voldemort entrusted this book to Lucius Malfoy, it was not out of carelessness. It was a calculated act. He believed that Lucius, bound by blood and old aristocratic ties, would keep it safe until the time came. As the text later revealed in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry, Lord Voldemort liked to collect trophies, and he particularly prized items that had once belonged to the founders of Hogwarts. The diary, however, was different. It had not belonged to a founder but to himself, a founder of darkness in his own right. It was not just a Horcrux, it was his story. The diary contained more than a soul. It was a living testament. It could write back, deceive, seduce, and manipulate. It was through this object that young Ginny Weasley was possessed, her will overtaken, her mind unravelling under the subtle influence of the teenage Tom Riddle, who emerged from the pages. The projection of Tom was so lifelike, so cunning, that Harry mistook him for a real person. And when Riddle scrawled his name in the air, Tom Marvolo Riddle, only to rearrange it into I am Lord Voldemort, it wasn't merely a reveal, it was a triumph of his design. What makes the diary more disturbing than the other Horcruxes is precisely this capacity for resurrection. It was an echo that could speak, walk, and kill. While the other fragments of soul hid in their relics, terrified of discovery, this one fought for dominance. In Chamber of Secrets, Riddle's projection declares, Ginny poured out her soul to me, and her soul happened to be exactly what I needed. I grew stronger and stronger on a diet of her deepest fears, her darkest secrets. This wasn't just a magical diary, it was a parasitic intelligence, feeding on emotion and growing in power. Why then was this Horcrux not guarded with the obsessive secrecy shown to the others? The answer lies in Voldemort's mind. It was his first, his prototype, the one that succeeded. It wasn't meant to be buried in a vault or hidden in a cave. The diary was meant to act as a seed, an introduction to his greater work. It was an elegant weapon in a much larger plan. He never imagined that it would be destroyed. He never dreamed that anyone would suspect what it really was. And when Harry pierced it with the basilisk fang, Voldemort, wherever he existed at the time, felt a pain deeper than physical. The loss of the diary was a blow not just to his soul, but to his pride. Though Voldemort later mocked Lucius for carelessly giving the diary away, the truth is that Tom Riddle's younger self had believed in the invincibility of his creation. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore comments on this flaw. Lord Voldemort was indeed very fond of the diary, very proud of the magical effects he had managed to produce. It was a masterstroke of dark magic, and its destruction was a warning that he had underestimated Dumbledore's army. Each of Voldemort's Horcruxes was made from an act of murder, and thus each carried the weight of death. But the diary bore something else. It was created from the death of Moaning Myrtle, a Hogwarts student. It was not just a fragment. It was tied directly to the school Voldemort once loved and later despised. Myrtle's death opened the chamber. Her ghost lingered in the bathroom where Ginny would later fall victim. The cycle of pain embedded in the diary was intricate and cruel. It was a relic of teenage genius twisted by power. Voldemort's attachment to the diary could also be seen in its construction. Unlike the other Horcruxes, which were bound to legendary magical artifacts, the diary was humble. It did not need prestige to be powerful. This contrast only underscores how personal it was. It wasn't chosen for its fame. It was his own belonging, a relic of his years at Hogwarts when he was still forming his philosophy and still craving recognition. It is no coincidence that the diary mimics the function of a memory, allowing the past to speak again. The young Tom Riddle who emerges from the diary is not yet the monstrous figure Harry meets in the graveyard. He is articulate, attractive, intelligent, dangerously so. There is charm in him, even allure. The diary allowed this version of Riddle to live again, to seduce a new generation. It was as if Voldemort wanted his younger self to be remembered, to be feared once more. And perhaps, buried deep within, was a desire to be understood. For all his cruelty, Tom Riddle was a boy abandoned, and the diary was the only place where his original voice still lived. The possession of Ginny was no accident. It was a test. Would the diary still work? Would it be able to act independently? And more importantly, could it create chaos without Voldemort's direct presence? The answer was yes. And that terrified Dumbledore, for it meant Voldemort had found a way to exist, even in absence. The diary could think. It could kill. And it did not need its master's orders to do so. It was artificial life born from evil, and yet, in a twisted sense, it was also Voldemort's child. What is often overlooked is that Voldemort's decision to part with the diary, his favorite Horcrux, speaks volumes about his growing arrogance. He no longer viewed a piece of soul as something sacred. He had made 7. He believed himself immortal, and thus the diary could be used as a weapon, a tool in the wider plan. But in making that decision, he revealed his hubris. The diary's destruction was the first true loss. It tore a piece from him, not just magically, but psychologically. He was vulnerable, and it started with a book. The magic within the diary was not simply dark, it was brilliantly constructed. To enchant an object so that it could respond, influence, and manifest a version of self required an understanding of the deepest laws of magic. This was not something Voldemort learned from books, it was invention, it was his masterpiece. Dumbledore, who rarely praised dark magic, still acknowledged its complexity, and in doing so he hinted at the depth of the boy's potential, had it not been drowned in obsession. Of all the Horcruxes, only the diary demonstrated intent beyond survival. The cup, the ring, the locket, these were vessels. The diary was more than a vessel, it was a seed, it carried a mission. That mission was to reopen the chamber and kill, but it also carried echoes of Voldemort's ideology. It wrote back to Ginny, made her feel heard, isolated her from friends, and turned her into a puppet. In doing so, it mirrored how Voldemort recruits followers, through fear, charm, and control. When Harry destroyed the diary, it bled ink like blood. The basilisk fang did not merely damage the cover, it ruptured the soul within. The image of Tom Riddle screamed, faded, and vanished. The symbolism was sharp. It was not just a physical victory, it was the first time anyone had undone a part of Lord Voldemort. Harry would not understand the full gravity of that moment until years later. But to Voldemort, wherever his consciousness drifted at the time, it must have been a scream in the dark. Lucius Malfoy never fully understood what he was holding. Had he known it was a Horcrux, he might have treated it differently. But perhaps Voldemort's trust in Lucius was also a test. He wanted to see how the world would react. Would Hogwarts fall into chaos? Would someone suspect the truth? When it failed, Voldemort's rage was directed at Lucius, but the truth was harder to swallow. He had overestimated his creation's safety, and underestimated the boy who would destroy it. In the end, the diary remains the most haunting of the Horcruxes because it was closest to human. It spoke, it listened, it remembered, and it lied. It represents the young Tom Riddle's ambition, his manipulation, his talent, and his ultimate downfall. In destroying it, Harry unknowingly began the long unraveling of Voldemort's immortality. But more than that, he destroyed the version of Voldemort that might have been clever, curious, and devastatingly persuasive. The boy in the pages died before the man in the flesh. And yet, some say it was this Horcrux that Voldemort missed most, not because it made him weaker, but because it reminded him of a time when he was strong in a different way, when he could enchant with words instead of curses, when he was Tom, not Lord. In destroying the diary, Harry didn't just wound the Dark Lord, he erased a part of history, a part that Voldemort, despite himself, had once loved. Number 24, a Horcrux might be healable, theoretically. In the shadows of magical history, there are questions even the wisest of wizards hesitate to answer. One such question whispers through the halls of Hogwarts, lingers in the restricted section of the library, and echoes in the memories of those who knew Tom Riddle. Can a soul, once shattered, be made whole again? Albus Dumbledore, perhaps the only wizard who ever dared to understand the depth of such darkness without succumbing to it, once told Harry Potter that, "Whilst you cannot return from death, but there are worse things than death." He was speaking of Horcruxes, those unholy receptacles of soul fragments created through murder. Yet even in that grim lesson he allowed a sliver of uncertainty. "It is very hard to bring yourself back from that," Dumbledore said. "Very hard. Almost impossible, in fact." The word almost was like a crack in an ancient wall, narrow but filled with the possibility of light. It is this word that has obsessed a small number of magical theorists and historians for centuries. If almost impossible means not entirely impossible, then what kind of magic could possibly restore what was so brutally torn? Was Dumbledore speaking hypothetically, or did he, perhaps in some buried corner of his heart, believe in the possibility of redemption, even for those who committed the darkest of acts? In the 18th century, a lesser-known scholar of soul magic, Euphraxia Mole, wrote in her unfinished manuscript, Fragments of the Self, a treatise on divided souls, that a Horcrux is not an eternal prison, but a wound upon the soul, a festering one to be sure, but a wound nonetheless. Mole theorized that if a wizard or witch truly and deeply repented, a lost fragment of the soul might respond to that remorse, like a severed limb twitching at the sound of a loved one's voice. But her writings were buried after her mysterious disappearance, and her work was dismissed by the scholarly circles of her day as dangerous speculation. Yet not all dismissed it. The idea resurfaced during the first rise of Voldemort, when the unspeakables of the Department of Mysteries began to record soul disturbances, traces of incomplete magical presence in objects thought to be ordinary. One such object, the Locket of Slytherin, emitted an energy that a few brave researchers described as anguished rather than malevolent. What if the soul fragment inside the locket was not merely dormant, but trapped, suffering? If this is true, the destruction of a Horcrux may not just be an act of purging evil, but an act of mercy. And if a soul fragment can feel pain, can it also feel regret, guilt, a longing to return? This question haunts the legacy of Regulus Arcturus Black. A former Death Eater, Regulus died trying to destroy the Horcrux he stole from Voldemort, a soul fragment encased in Slytherin's locket. What if Regulus, in that final act of defiance, catalyzed something ancient, not just the beginning of Voldemort's defeat, but the whisper of a forgotten magic? In risking his life to end the life of a fragment, did he ignite the first flicker of redemption, not for Voldemort, but for the lost part of his soul? And yet Voldemort was incapable of remorse. This was confirmed by Dumbledore and reinforced by his ultimate undoing. When Harry confronts the shade of Voldemort's soul at King's Cross and a naked child curled on the ground whimpering under a bench, the horror is not only in its appearance, but in its permanence. Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love, Dumbledore said. The fragment could not be helped because Tom Riddle could not allow himself to feel. This is the crux of the theory. Healing a soul does not occur through external intervention, but through the soul's own desire to be healed. Repentance is not a spell. It is an internal transformation so deep and painful that most cannot endure it. Horace Slughorn, who once gave Tom Riddle information about Horcruxes, describes the feeling of remorse as excruciating. A soul may recoil from it as one recoils from flame. Only the most profound, selfless sorrow could knit together what murder tore apart. Consider the story of Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady, whose ghost still roams the halls of Hogwarts. She stole her mother's diadem out of pride and fled, only to die at the hands of the Bloody Baron, who, consumed with guilt, took his own life moments later. Centuries passed before Helena confessed to Harry the location of the Horcrux Voldemort had made from her mother's relic. One wonders, had her spirit been tied to the world not only by pride, but also by the unfinished business of helping repair what had been corrupted? In guiding Harry, she acted out a form of penance, and perhaps, had she been living, her soul might have found a path to healing. This leads us to the critical distinction between being fragmented and being corrupted. A fragmented soul is incomplete, wounded. A corrupted soul is something else entirely. Tom Riddle's soul was both. But imagine a young wizard tricked into creating a Horcrux who killed in self-defense or under duress and regretted it profoundly. Would the universe deny him the chance to make amends? Some say no. In the ancient texts of the Tibetan wizarding monks, referenced briefly in Bathilda Bagshot's unpublished appendix to A History of Magic, there is a ritual called karmic rebinding. It is said to involve a convergence of magical energies, ritual purification, and above all, a full and sincere acceptance of guilt. No known wizard has survived the ritual, but fragments of the process have been found etched into the cave walls of Bhutan. According to legend, the ritual can call the soul pieces back to the source, if the soul calls first. Dumbledore once admitted that he had sought the resurrection stone, not just for power, but for atonement. "I was such a fool, Harry," he said. "I was only fit to possess the Elder Wand, not the other Hallows." His use of the word fit was deliberate. A whole soul is not one without scars, but one that bears its scars with humility. Dumbledore's soul was never fractured into Horcruxes, but he carried guilt so deep it ached through his very skin. Harry, too, provides an example, unique, but illuminating. For a brief time, a piece of Voldemort's soul lived inside him. It made him a Horcrux, though unintentionally. When Voldemort hit Harry with the killing curse in the Forbidden Forest, the piece was destroyed, yet Harry survived, not just physically but spiritually. He remained whole. Why? Because he was never corrupted. The soul fragment clung to him, but he never accepted its influence. He had nothing to repent. Imagine then a different child, a child who did make the Horcrux willingly, but then changed. If Harry could survive the destruction of the soul fragment because he was innocent, could another survive it by becoming penitent? In the Room of Requirement, when Ron stabs the locket Horcrux, it shows him visions meant to terrify and torment. It preys on guilt, insecurity, and fear, but it also feels, it resists, it begs, it cries out. Can something that cries also hope? Can it forgive itself? The locket screamed when it died. So did the cup, so did the diadem. These were not the cries of indifferent objects, they were the cries of imprisoned consciousness. Whether the soul fragment can choose or not is a question beyond current magical comprehension, but the pain, unmistakably, was real. And so we return to the possibility that remorse, profound and transformative, might call back a piece of a torn soul. Could a wizard sit in silence for years, letting guilt consume and reshape him, and then call back the piece he had cut away? Could he become whole again, not as he was, but as someone better? If so, the cost would be immense. Hermione Granger, ever the realist, once said that no spell can reawaken the dead. But what of the almost dead? What of the soul, lingering in fragments, longing for reunion? Could love, real, painful, redemptive love, be the key? In the Department of Mysteries, the Hall of Prophecy is but one chamber among many. There is also the Hall of Love, sealed to nearly all. Only those who carry deep emotional understanding may enter. Some theorists believe that deep within that chamber lies the true answer, not in spells or artifacts, but in the oldest force of all, the power to heal, not just hurt, the power to restore. Perhaps the real tragedy of Voldemort is not that he split his soul, but that he never believed it was worth mending. He never looked into the mirror of Erised and saw a man made whole, not through dominance, but through forgiveness. There is no good and evil, he once said, only power. And so he died with a soul in pieces. But if one day another wizard stands on the same precipice and chooses sorrow over pride, compassion over fear, then maybe, just maybe, the almost impossible would become reality. A soul once broken might sing again. Number 25. Horcruxes change the object they inhabit. Few magical phenomena in the wizarding world are as horrifying and fascinating as the Horcrux. While much has been written about the gruesome process of creating one, committing murder to rip apart the soul, far less attention is given to what happens next. The Horcrux is not merely a container, it is a transformation. Once a fragment of the soul enters an object, the object itself begins to change, fundamentally, intrinsically, and often permanently. It does not just become a vault, it becomes something new. This quiet but profound metamorphosis is one of the darkest secrets in Voldemort's legacy. Take the diary of Tom Riddle, discovered by Ginny Weasley during her first year at Hogwarts. At first glance, it was nothing more than an ordinary black diary, blank, leather-bound, unremarkable. But once Ginny began writing in it, it revealed a life of its own. The ink disappeared, only to be replaced with Tom's responses. It engaged her, seduced her trust, and eventually possessed her. Diaries in the wizarding world might be enchanted to take notes or organize information, but this was different. This diary had intent. It manipulated, lied, remembered. It was not a spellbound book. It was sentient. The diary's been behaving in the strangest manner, Ginny confesses, and the full terror of what she means only becomes clear later. This is no ordinary enchantment. What we see in Tom Riddle's diary is a soul fragment twisting the nature of the object it inhabits. Before the Horcrux was made, the diary was a vessel for memories, a gift from a student to the future. But once infected with Voldemort's soul, it became an active agent of harm. It could project Tom Riddle's consciousness into the physical world, manipulate the basilisk, and nearly murder a student. No simple spell can account for such power. The diary was reborn the moment the soul entered it. Then there is the locket of Salazar Slytherin. Once a proud family heirloom, its descent into darkness is unmistakable. As a Horcrux, the locket did more than guard a soul. It preyed on the wearer's psyche. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione took turns carrying it during their hunt for Horcruxes, they each experienced disturbing symptoms. Harry was gripped by paranoia and sadness. Ron was consumed by jealousy and rage. Hermione, usually composed, grew cold and withdrawn. None of these feelings were foreign to them, but the locket magnified them, distorted them, until they nearly turned against each other. It became a mirror reflecting their worst fears and insecurities. This psychological warping was not incidental. The locket, infused with Voldemort's soul, adapted to the emotions of its bearer. It didn't just protect itself, it retaliated. Ron's hallucination of Harry and Hermione kissing was not random, it was targeted. The Horcrux knew his vulnerabilities and exploited them. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows we read, "The locket was beating like a heart, and the sound filled the tent, loud and fast." The object pulsed with a life of its own. A mere piece of jewelry does not behave this way. It had become something entirely new, a weapon forged from emotion. Perhaps the most insidious example is the diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. Long thought lost to history, the diadem was said to grant wisdom to its wearer. Once transformed into a Horcrux, it became something more insidious, a whispering voice of doubt. Worn by Helena Ravenclaw and later hidden in the Room of Requirement, the diadem radiated self-loathing and inferiority. Its magic was no longer enlightening, it was corrupting. When Voldemort chose the diadem, he did so not only because of its connection to Hogwarts, but because of its symbolism, wisdom twisted into despair. The diadem's influence is subtler than the lockets or the diaries, but no less destructive. It doesn't scream, it whispers, and that makes it all the more dangerous. Those who encountered it felt their confidence slip, their minds cloud. Even as an inanimate object, it projected Voldemort's insecurity, the same gnawing sense of being unloved and unwanted that drove him to seek immortality. The soul fragment within didn't just hide, it infected. Its presence became a poison to thought. This is why every Horcrux is unique, not merely because each object is different, but because the soul fragment adapts to its container. The emotions used to create the Horcrux, the act of murder, the feeling of power, the fear of death, blend with the nature of the object itself. The result is something entirely new, a hybrid of person and possession. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff, for instance, exuded arrogance and superiority, betraying nothing of Hufflepuff's values. It was used by Bellatrix Lestrange, kept in a vault surrounded by replication and fire curses, symbols of paranoia and greed. Voldemort did not merely pick random artifacts. He chose items with meaning, historical, magical, or emotional. These weren't just containers, they were canvases, and his soul, broken and twisted, painted over them with a brush dipped in madness. The changes were not only magical, but symbolic. The diary became a voice, the locket became a tormentor, the diadem became a corrupter, the cup became a mockery. Even Nagini, the only living Horcrux, illustrates this idea. Once an ordinary snake, perhaps enchanted, perhaps not, Nagini became unnaturally loyal, viciously intelligent, and near indestructible. When Voldemort turned her into a Horcrux, her bond with him deepened into something symbiotic. She protected him, served him, and eventually became his downfall. The act of becoming a Horcrux changed her nature. A snake became something more, something monstrous, something aware. The transformation of a Horcrux object is not taught at Hogwarts, nor is it likely to be found in any book in the restricted section. Horace Slughorn only hints at it in Half-Blood Prince. It's not dark magic, Tom, it's the darkest. He knows the cost of such magic is not only the soul's fragmentation, but the twisting of the very fabric of reality. For a soul to bond with an object, the object must be opened, physically, magically, and spiritually. The soul does not simply sit inside like a key in a drawer, it fuses, it infects. In doing so, the soul changes the object's magical signature. Every magical object has an aura, some call it intent, others essence. When Voldemort's soul enters, it leaves behind a scar, a residue. This residue manifests as power, yes, but also as pain. No one can wear Slytherin's locket without feeling ill. No one can write in the diary without losing themselves. No one can walk near the cup without feeling cold. These objects pulse with wrongness, and that wrongness is the fingerprint of a broken soul. Consider also the Ring of Marvel O'Gaunt. A relic of Slytherin's line, the ring held not only a Horcrux, but the Resurrection Stone. The two magics clashed within it, one born of death, the other obsessed with it. When Dumbledore put it on, despite knowing better, the ring cursed him. The Horcrux's influence was immediate and fatal. He described it as a terrible temptation. Even he, the greatest wizard of the age, was not immune to its lure. The ring didn't just curse his flesh, it attacked his will. It promised things the soul wanted, and then it punished him for wanting them. These objects do not behave as ordinary magical artifacts. They lie, they tempt, they whisper. They have personality, not because they are sentient in the usual sense, but because they are haunted. They reflect the soul within, not as it was in life, but as it became after murder and mutilation. Voldemort's fear of death, his need for control, his loathing of love, all of it is echoed in the behavior of his Horcruxes. The uniqueness of each Horcrux lies in the interplay between object and soul. It is not a passive union. The object pushes back. The soul twists. And what results is a third thing, a new entity, not quite object, not quite spirit. A cursed hybrid. This is why destroying them is so difficult. Basilisk venom works not just because it destroys the object, but because it pierces the magical bond holding the soul in place. Fire, too, if hot and magical enough, can unravel the fusion, but only destruction can truly free the soul fragment, and even then it leaves scars. Voldemort never understood this. He believed his soul could be divided without consequence. But magic does not work that way. Every action has a price, and every Horcrux was a bill yet to be paid. The changes wrought in each object were warnings, echoes of a soul screaming in agony. And still he ignored them. He saw only immortality, never the decay it left in its wake. There is a moment in Deathly Hallows when Ron, after destroying the locket, drops to his knees, trembling. The vision it showed him, the betrayal, the hatred, the lies, nearly shattered him. But when it was over, he felt lighter, as if something dark had been lifted. Because it had. The soul fragment's presence was gone, and with it, the corruption that had seeped into the locket's core. This is the lesson we too often miss. Horcruxes are not just hidden lives, they are transformations. They change the object, the wielder, the space they inhabit. They become echoes of their creator's darkest moments, memorials to pain. And in destroying them, one does not just kill a piece of Voldemort, one purifies the very object he corrupted. So when you next hear of the diary, the locket, the diadem, remember these were not just cursed objects. They were living shadows, and like all shadows, they carried with them the shape of the monster who cast them. Number 26. Voldemort's soul survived death because of the Horcruxes. When Lord Voldemort's killing curse rebounded from the infant Harry Potter, it was not merely his body that perished in the explosion. That night in Godric's Hollow, magic itself trembled. What emerged from the wreckage was not a corpse, but a terrifying new mystery in the study of dark magic. The soul of Tom Marvolo Riddle, torn and scattered, did not pass into the beyond. It clung to existence, howling, writhing, but alive. This defiance of death had not been achieved through power alone. Wizards before Voldemort had sought immortality through alchemy, enchanted objects, even the Philosopher's Stone. But none had dared the route Voldemort took, mutilating his soul so profoundly that it could never depart this world naturally. Horcruxes, terrifying vessels of dark magic, had existed in whispers and hidden books, yet no one had dared create more than one. Voldemort made 7. What is astounding is not only that he lived, but how he lived. The being that fled from the ruins of the Potter's home was not human. It had no flesh, no blood, no heart to beat or lungs to breathe. And yet it persisted. Its continued existence proves something deeply unsettling. A fragmented soul, once anchored to multiple Horcruxes, can resist death entirely, even when the body has been destroyed beyond repair. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Voldemort returns to corporeal form, But prior to that, for nearly 13 years, he was a spectral echo. His soul had nowhere to go because death had nowhere to claim it. In the Goblet of Fire, Voldemort confesses, "I was ripped from my body. I was less than spirit, less than the meanest ghost. But still I was alive." That confession alone changed what wizardkind thought it knew about the soul, about death, and about the very limits of dark magic. This ghost-like form was not akin to the spirits that roamed Hogwarts corridors. Ghosts, like Nearly Headless Nick or the Grey Lady, are the result of a wizard's decision not to move on after death. Voldemort's condition was different. He had not chosen to remain. Rather, he had been trapped in a liminal space between life and death, his soul, too damaged and too tethered to the world to cross over. His Horcruxes, Tom Riddle's diary, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, Salazar Slytherin's locket, Helga Hufflepuff's cup, Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, Nagini the snake, and the unintended fragment in Harry Potter acted like anchors dragging his broken essence back into the realm of the living. While each Horcrux contained only a sliver of soul, their combined force acted as a net catching what remained of Voldemort's identity and refusing to let it dissolve into nothingness. This condition had chilling consequences. The spirit of Voldemort, bodiless and cold, was drawn to places of death and despair. Albania became his refuge, a forest where shadows crawled and magic thinned the veil between worlds. There he possessed snakes and small creatures, barely clinging to sanity, feeding off the life force of animals to sustain his shapeless existence. Professor Dumbledore suspected this phenomenon early. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, he tells Harry he was at the point of death, at the very least, but he did not die. He existed, only just, as less than the meanest ghost, but alive still, with a body of sorts and a will to return. Dumbledore's words carry the weight of fear, not only for what Voldemort was, but for what others might try if they learned of this unnatural state. The traditional understanding of Horcruxes never included the idea that they could preserve life without a body. The very act of creating one involves a murder, a violent severing of the soul. Yet Voldemort's innovation, if one could call it that, was to create multiple Horcruxes, ensuring that even if one anchor was destroyed, others remained. He believed this to make him invincible. In truth, it made him monstrous. Voldemort's continued existence challenges the most sacred of magical laws. Death, for most wizards, is final. Ghosts are rare exceptions, but Voldemort showed that death could be delayed, evaded, even defied, if one were willing to pay the cost. The cost, of course, was unimaginable pain, the degradation of the soul, and a fate arguably worse than death itself. His fragmented soul became unstable, unpredictable. When a piece of it attached itself to Harry, it transferred more than just a scar. It connected their minds, their dreams, even their speech. The diary of Tom Riddle, his first Horcrux, offers another haunting glimpse. In the Chamber of Secrets, young Riddle siphons Ginny Weasley's life force to regain physical form, albeit temporarily. This shows how a fragment of soul, even detached from Voldemort himself, retains awareness, will, and the desire to live. It acted independently, seducing, manipulating, and almost killing, all without Voldemort's direct control. Such resilience is beyond terrifying. No other wizard in recorded magical history had accomplished this. Herpo the Foul, the ancient dark sorcerer, believed to have created the first Horcrux, never attempted more than one. The soul, after all, is delicate. Breaking it repeatedly, violently, fractures the self in ways that defy repair. Dumbledore himself warned, "Few would want it, Tom, very few. Death would be preferable." Indeed, Voldemort's transformation into something less than spirit was not a state of power, it was agony. He could not touch, feel, or speak properly. He was not dead, yet he could not be said to be alive. He was a parasite, needing hosts to act, needing others to move, needing magic, not his own, to regain form. That he survived at all reveals how the Horcruxes did more than contain fragments. They acted as lighthouses for his shattered essence, calling him back from the brink. One of the clearest depictions of his condition comes from the Goblet of Fire, when Wormtail concocts the potion to create a rudimentary body for Voldemort. The vessel described as a baby-like creature is grotesque. It was hairless and scaly-looking, a dark, raw, reddish-black. Its face was flat and snake-like, with gleaming red eyes. This was not resurrection, it was barely rebirth, but it was enough to prove that the soul, though shattered, could still command flesh. What makes Voldemort's survival even more horrifying is that it could have gone on indefinitely. If not for the destruction of each Horcrux, his soul might have clung to this world for centuries, jumping from host to host, feeding on the weak, manipulating the desperate. He had become a ghost with teeth. Even Nagini, one of his most trusted companions, was more than just a pet. She was a living Horcrux, a snake with a fragment of soul inside her. That gave Voldemort a mobile, thinking extension of himself, one he could possess and through whom he could kill. In the Deathly Hallows, Harry even sees through Nagini's eyes when Voldemort uses the connection between them. The lines between soul, animal, and dark magic blur completely. The case of Harry Potter adds another layer to the horror. When Voldemort's killing curse failed, a fragment of his soul latched onto the only living being in the room, Harry himself. This was not intentional. It was a magical accident, a grotesque echo of the soul's desperation not to be lost. That fragment gave Harry the ability to speak parcel tongue, to sense Voldemort's presence, and even to house pieces of his thoughts. Harry unknowingly carried the soul of his enemy within him for years. When Dumbledore explains this to Harry in the Deathly Hallows, the truth becomes undeniable. You were the seventh Horcrux, Harry, the Horcrux he never meant to make. This revelation reframes the entire series. Harry's scar was not just a wound, it was a living tether to a soul too damaged to die. In King's Cross, during Harry's near-death experience, he sees what remains of that soul fragment. It is a small, naked child curled on the ground, its skin raw and rough, flayed-looking, and it lay shuddering under a seat where it had been left, unwanted, stuffed out of sight, struggling for breath. This vision is not symbolic. It is a manifestation of Voldemort's soul, maimed, helpless, and beyond healing. This was the true cost of immortality. Voldemort did not escape death. He postponed it, twisted it, and turned his soul into something unrecognizable. His triumph was not over death, but over dignity, over peace, and ultimately over himself. In his quest for eternal life, he created a prison of eternal decay. The Horcruxes worked. They performed their terrible function. But their success is not something to envy. It is a warning. To destroy the soul so utterly that it can no longer die is not to conquer death, but to lose everything that makes life worth living. Voldemort may have believed he was the master of death, but in truth he became its most tragic prisoner, a ghost with no afterlife, a soul too broken to return and too cursed to vanish. And that, more than any wand, any spell, or any prophecy, is what truly made him the Dark Lord. Number 27 Horcruxes may retain memory and personality. There is a strange and terrifying truth buried within the dark art of Horcrux making, a fact most wizards have never paused to consider. A Horcrux can inherit the memories and the personality of its creator. It is not simply a cursed container, a lifeless vault to store a piece of soul. It can be something far more sinister. It can become a sentient fragment, thinking and feeling, planning and deceiving. The most chilling example of this phenomenon resides in a small black diary that once belonged to a teenage boy named Tom Riddle. This diary, seemingly innocent at first glance, became the centerpiece of a chain of horrors at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in the early 1990s. Passed innocently to Ginny Weasley in her first year, it served as the portal through which the ancient evil of the Chamber of Secrets was awakened once more. Yet what truly startled those who later understood its nature was not simply that the diary could possess its reader, but that it could talk. Ginny confided in the diary. She poured her feelings, fears, and insecurities into its pages, and the diary responded. It answered with patience, with sympathy, with interest. It asked her questions. It offered support. It gave the illusion of understanding, all while tightening invisible chains around her mind. This wasn't a cursed object acting blindly. It was an intelligence, a version of Tom Riddle, smooth-tongued and charismatic, as alive on the page as he had been in the flesh. When Harry Potter finally encountered the diary's true nature, he didn't find a passive remnant of Voldemort. He found a predator. Tom Riddle materialized as a ghostly figure, solidifying as the life of Ginny Weasley ebbed away, feeding him strength. He boasted, "Ginny poured out her soul to me, and her soul happened to be exactly what I wanted." I grew stronger and stronger, on a diet of her deepest fears, her darkest secrets. There was more than just a sliver of Voldemort's soul inside the diary. There was ambition, pride, memory. The diary knew Hogwarts. It remembered the Chamber of Secrets, the basilisk, the pain of being overlooked by Dumbledore, the disdain for Muggle-borns. It was not simply mimicking Voldemort's hatred, it was born of it. The Horcrux had not only stored a piece of soul, it had replicated identity. The very notion should disturb anyone who studies magic. To create a Horcrux, one must commit murder, splitting the soul through the deepest violation of nature. But what most have not understood is that the soul fragment is not inert. It does not sleep. In cases where the vessel is designed not only to preserve but to act, like the diary, it can think and act and plan. What makes the diary so horrifying is that Tom Riddle had anticipated this. He created it to function. He intended for it to speak, to lure, to manipulate. This was not an accidental side effect, it was a calculated decision. Then that means that when Voldemort tore his soul to create it, he left not just essence, but conscious will. In effect, Tom Riddle had cloned a version of himself, not a physical clone, but a mental one, a spiritual duplicate, capable of independent thought. That version of him did not know everything Voldemort would later become. It was frozen in time, bound by the memories and beliefs of the 16-year-old boy who made it. But it was still Tom Riddle, still brilliant, still cruel. There are lines in the Chamber of Secrets that point to this clearly, yet are easy to overlook. Riddle explains, "I preserved my 16-year-old self in the diary. Not a voice, not a message, not an enchantment, but himself." What other dark object has ever carried such intent? Even Dumbledore recognized the unique danger. When Harry later brought him the diary, he said, "Very few people ever knew that Tom Riddle had begun to experiment even then with the most terrible of all dark magic." He spoke of Horcruxes, but it is clear he meant more than the act of splitting the soul. He meant the potential, the alive potential, of a soul fragment set free. Think of this, the diary. Tom could speak, remember, and evolve. He learned things Ginny told him that the original Tom Riddle had not known. He interacted, not passively, but with cunning and invention. In theory, had he succeeded in fully resurrecting himself through Ginny's death, he may have become another Voldemort, perhaps with the same cruelty, but not the same trajectory, a fork in the path of evil.